Hello and welcome to Did You Know Gaming Extra. In this episode we'll be looking at some controversies relating to Nintendo. We're sure you guys know we love Nintendo as much as the next YouTube trivia channel, but that doesn't mean they don't miss the mark from time to time. And when we say controversy, we're not just talking about game releases that weren't up to the standards of Nintendo players, we're talking about the moments where oversights and a lack of quality assurance left the company looking a bit silly, or worse. This first story comes from back in 2008 but relates to a game from 2005. Kotaku editor-in-chief, Stephen Totilo, was sent a copy of Animal Crossing Wild World during his tenure with MTV. The game wasn't sealed, but had been sent to Stephen by Nintendo, alongside a letter encouraging him to use this copy of Wild World so that he could import all of the save files, unlocked items and characters for the newly released Animal Crossing City Folk on the Wii. Now it's important that we acknowledge first and foremost that the player is able to teach villagers in Animal Crossing games new words and phrases. For example, giving them new greetings for the player. It seems that with regards to this copy of the game, whoever had spent their time running through the game collecting items for the press to make use of, taught their villagers some rather controversial phrases. The example supplied by Stephen was when he was approached by the brown sheep villager Barbara, who said to him, "Heart you long time, how are you, N-word?" Whilst censored in Stephen's photo at the time, it's clear that the first line is a reference to Full Metal Jacket, while the noun used to refer to the player has been written with accented characters to circumvent the censoring of explicit words coded into the game. How these two phrases wound up in a copy of the game that not only came out of Nintendo's press offices, but was even sent to a member of the mainstream gaming press is a bit perplexing. Additionally, Stephen confirmed with then Kotaku editor Brian Crescente that he too had received a copy with similar player-added dialogue. Nintendo commented on the mix-up, explaining that the user-generated catchphrases were added to the game without their knowledge via wireless communication. They also said, "We sincerely apologize for the incident and are working with media who received the game cards to return them to Nintendo immediately." This isn't the only time that Nintendo found themselves in hot water with this sort of language. In April of 2015, Nintendo of America wrote a tweet accompanied by a photo of a Waluigi plush toy riding a Wiggler with a body of text reading, "Reply for hashtag Waluigi Wednesday, reply flower emoji for hashtag Wigger Wednesday." Of course, this is not what they had in mind, having accidentally missed the L from the Wiggler's name. The response from followers of the Nintendo account were mostly that of confusion. Ultimately, the tweet was deleted and Nintendo issued an apology. This didn't stop the hashtag from becoming a minor trend across Twitter, however. And if you didn't already know, Wigger is a derogatory term for a white person who tries to emulate the culture of black people, specifically African American culture. It seems Nintendo often finds themselves in trouble for their choice of words. In 2014, Tomodachi Life was making its way into people's households, allowing players to live a second life on their Nintendo 3DS. A fan-created petition made the rounds after Nintendo refrained from including the choice of sexuality. In particular, this petition requested the inclusion of gay marriage. Nintendo actually chose to respond to this petition. However, it was not particularly well received. Nintendo stated, "Nintendo never intended to make any form of social commentary with the launch of Tomodachi Life. The relationship options in the game represent a playful alternate world rather than a real-life simulation. We hope that all of our fans will see that Tomodachi Life was intended to be a whimsical and quirky game, and that we were absolutely not trying to provide social commentary." The ability for same-sex relationships to occur in the game was not part of the original game that launched in Japan, and that game was made up of the same code that was used to localize it for other regions outside of Japan. We have heard and thoughtfully considered all the responses. We will continue to listen and think about the feedback. We are using this as an opportunity to better understand our consumers and their expectations of us at all levels of the organization. We have been looking to broaden our approach to development whenever possible, as we put all of our energy into continuing to develop fun games that will surprise and delight players. With continued backlash from fans, the company furthered their statement soon after. They claimed that it wouldn't be possible to include same-sex marriage through a post-launch patch, but that they would strive to create a more inclusive title within the Tomodachi franchise in the future. They said, "We pledge that if we create a next installment in the Tomodachi series, we will strive to design a gameplay experience from the ground up that is more inclusive and better represents all players." The issue was seen as divisive across Japan and the Western world, with localization being the most prominent issue. In parts of America and Europe, gay marriage is legal, but even now, this opportunity is not available to Japanese citizens, though the recognition of gay partnerships is gaining public support as time goes on. How a company communicates with their audience can draw a lot of reactions, particularly when the choice to speak on something is optional. But one of Nintendo's products was entirely about communicating bluntly with its users: Wii Fit. The game was created to help players control their body weight and health, providing exercise routines and charts to track progress towards getting that sick bod we all want. It isn't so easy for some of us though. Experts on the topic of obesity went after Nintendo in 2008 because of how it communicates information to its users through Wii Fit, particularly when its users are young. The game was scrutinized for being potentially harmful to a young mind's body image. A father from southeast England recalled the embarrassment his daughter felt after she, a 4'9", 10-year-old who partakes in regular physical activity, was called fat by the company's game. He told UK's Daily Mail, "She is solidly built but not fat. She was devastated to be called fat and we had to work hard to convince her she isn't. I know it's just a game, but we already have to worry about young girls starving themselves to look like magazine models, and now we have a game that tells them they're fat. This, to me, is very worrying." Many claim the game is simply not suitable for children, with measurements being conducted through Body Mass Index, or BMI, a numerical indicator that measures body fat based on height and weight, though it's only really used to measure these factors for adults and not children. Even for adults, BMI shouldn't be taken as gospel, being only a rough calculation, as it has no real way of measuring an individual's muscle mass. Nintendo's response to the incident was that they wouldn't apply warnings to the game's materials as many had requested. A spokesman for the company said, "Nintendo would like to apologize to any customers offended by the in-game terminology used to classify a player's current BMI status as part of the BMI measurement system integrated into Wii Fit. Wii Fit is still capable of measuring the BMI for people aged between 2 and 20, but the resulting figures may not be entirely accurate for younger age groups due to varying levels of development." Our most recent case of controversy for Nintendo comes from the Switch, and it's one that, to many players, has likely been a cause for concern. The console's Joy-Con controllers are part of a class action lawsuit in the US after thousands of users reported issues of drift, with the controller's analog stick registering false inputs. Nintendo president Shuntaro Furukawa acknowledged the situation and provided a response during a Q&A session, though didn't exactly admit the company was at any fault for their faulty hardware. In June of 2020, he stated, "We apologize for any inconvenience caused to our customers regarding Joy-Con. We will do our best to ensure that our customers can use our services and products with peace of mind." This came across to many, myself included, as a non-apology. Furukawa claims that due to the lawsuit, the company cannot directly comment on the issue at hand. The lawsuit alleges that the controllers have design faults that stem from extensive wear on the pad's surface resulting from steel brushes inside the controller. The suit explains that to repair this issue, owners of a Joy-Con would need to pay for the repairs despite the issue being a manufacturing fault, and in some cases, the fixes are not adequate. The latest on this particular case is that it has been referred to arbitration, meaning an unbiased third-party arbitrator will be assigned to settle the case outside of court. However, Nintendo's Joy-Con woes don't stop there. In September of 2020, it was revealed that French consumer organisation UFC Coup Choisir are launching a fresh complaint over the drift in the controllers, claiming planned obsolescence and anti-consumer practices. A spokesperson for the non-profit organisation said, "The nature of the failure, how frequently it occurs for players, the limited lifespan of the product, and the manufacturer's inertia despite being informed of the defect. These are all characteristics of planned obsolescence practices at Nintendo." The lawsuit, filed in the French commune of Nanterre, hopes to change the way the controllers are manufactured to ensure better customer satisfaction.
When you think about piracy or anti-piracy measures in games, you probably think about PC gaming, the Nintendo DS or Game Boy Advance, or maybe even the Dreamcast or PlayStation. But one console that probably doesn't come to mind is the Nintendo 64. Due to the system using cartridges, pirated copies were more expensive to reproduce. This meant that pirates in the late 90s and early 2000s instead set their sights on the Dreamcast and PS1, as discs were a lot cheaper to reproduce. With that said, it wasn't as if developers just left their N64 games without any form of copy protection. Many N64 titles actually have anti-piracy, including titles like The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and several titles made by Rare, such as Donkey Kong 64. So in this video, we'll be showing you some of the most noteworthy examples of anti-piracy measures in Nintendo 64 games, starting with the much-loved platformer collectathon, Banjo-Tooie. Rare knew that Banjo-Kazooie was a hit with the Nintendo 64, and they wanted to make sure its sequel sold just as well, by introducing new anti-piracy measures. But we're sure the team didn't expect their efforts to be so effective that Tooie is often touted as the most copy-protected N64 title in the entire system's library. In fact, the ROM for Banjo-Tooie wasn't entirely cracked until December 2012, over 12 years after its release. Although Tooie could be played relatively issue-free on Nintendo 64 emulators on PC, prior to December 2012, the game wouldn't work properly on flash carts like the EverDrive. This is partly a result of the emulators being able to emulate boot chips and the like, but it's also due to the game having many anti-piracy checks. The first test occurs when the game is powered on, where it checks for the correct save type. Banjo-Tooie uses a 2KB EEPROM, but if the save type for the game is incorrect, or there simply is no save chip present on the game's cartridge, the game acts as if there's no controller plugged in. This means no buttons will respond, and a no controller message will display on screen. The second level of copy protection comes in the form of a CIC lockout chip which the game checks for, with NTSC copies of the game checking to see if a CIC NUS 6105 chip is present, and PAL copies looking out for a CIC NUS 7105 chip. This check is done by using the challenge response feature found in these chips, which Banjo-Tooie makes heavy use of throughout gameplay, with 268 different checks in total. The responses from the CIC chip are used to decrypt files associated with the game's assets, so if any of these checks end up failing, the game can't decrypt the data, and will be unable to load a required asset into the game. This results in all manner of crashes, and since this happens hundreds of times throughout the game, it's essentially unplayable. If you're not familiar with Nintendo 64 anti-piracy, and who'd blame you, you might be asking yourself, what the hell are these CIC chips the game uses? Well, it's a fascinating series of chips that many N64 games use for copy protection, including several more games in this video. So we're going to briefly explain how it works. CICs are boot chips. And ever since the NES and SNES, Nintendo had implemented CICs in their systems to curb piracy. However, it wasn't long before pirates worked out a means of circumventing the anti-piracy measures that utilized these chips, and so it became open for the masses to play downloaded ROMs. For the N64, Nintendo didn't stray too far from the measures they already knew, and continued to utilize CIC chips. However, Nintendo knew that these were simple to bypass, so a change in implementation was made. Instead of the N64 including a corresponding CIC chip, it instead used a PIF bus. This handled the system's initial boot code for the system, as well as handling controller inputs, but mostly it handles security on the console. It checks that a cartridge contains the correct CIC chip, thus checking if it's been pirated, and that it's a cartridge with the same region as the console. With the SNES, it became simple enough to disable the circuit which the CIC in both the cartridges and the system utilized, but the N64 now had a chip which handled multiple functions, and didn't work in sync with the chip on the cartridge. This means that stopping the circuit the chip is running on would just result in games failing to boot entirely. This meant that N64 devices which ran backups would often require the use of a legitimate cartridge as well, in order to use the CIC chip located on the legitimate game. In total, there were 5 different CIC chips on cartridges per region, which meant that you'd need to use a game which utilized the correct chip for the game you wanted to run. This was a problem for people wanting to play Star Fox 64, for example, as it was the only game to use the CIC NUS 6101 chip on the cartridge, which meant you'd need a legitimate copy of Star Fox 64 in order to play a backup copy. Over time, many clever people worked out the deeper inner workings of both the CIC and the PIF, and ultimately came up with a means to get around their methods. We mentioned before that Banjo-Tooie had stringent copy protection, but this was typical of Rare, who would aggressively protect their games from piracy. While most companies simply put faith into Nintendo's built-in anti-piracy measures, Rare implemented additional security in most of their games. And Jet Force Gemini was one of these titles. If the game detected a different variant of the CIC chip than what is supposed to be included in the game, it would still boot, but during the game, all weapons would be disabled. If the player tried pressing the Z button to fire, they'll simply hold their weapon out and do nothing, meaning that it would be impossible to progress past the first Life Force door in Goldwood. Additionally, if the player is controlling Juno, they'll no longer be able to run and be forced to move through the world at an incredibly slow walk speed. Most N64 backup devices used the 6102 and 7102 variants of the CIC chip, because this was the most common CIC in N64 carts. But Jet Force Gemini used 6105 and 7105 variants, which made the game difficult to pirate successfully. This was more strict than Rare's earlier anti-piracy measures, but the methods used in earlier titles such as Diddy Kong Racing could still leave would-be pirates a little vexed. Diddy Kong Racing makes the typical checks for the correct CIC chip, but interestingly, if it finds a chip of a different iteration, the game will actually let the player progress to a race, with a catch. From there, they'll be subjected to the pause menu continuously appearing to disrupt gameplay. We say this is less strict because, technically, this does mean that the player could complete the game if they continuously unpaused it, but this would probably be excruciating to endure, or perhaps a great speedrun category to watch on Games Done Quick. Donkey Kong 64 was similarly not quite as harsh at preventing the player from making progress, but it wasn't exactly forgiving of pirates. If a different CIC chip than the one included in the retail cart is being used, the game will boot and play completely fine. The only problem is the player would have to be willing to leave their system on even when they're not playing, as the game will randomly delete save data from the cartridge during gameplay without warning. But these examples are fairly simple: deleting save data, stopping the game from booting, or preventing progress. What about some whacked out nonsense that makes pirates confused and flustered? Perfect Dark contains a huge number of piracy checks in its data, with some being pretty simple and some being pretty bizarre. All of the game's anti-piracy measures occur when specific actions are taken in-game, and if one of the checks fails to determine the title is running unmodified and legitimately, they will trigger. The first check occurs during the power-on phase, causing the game to simply never boot. Another check is made when opening the game's cheat menu, which will simply crash the game. When opening a door, the game will rewrite its code to prevent doors from opening. If a simulant picks up an item in multiplayer, all guards will suddenly be able to see the player through walls, and when a guard uncloaks, this disables the ability for the player, and other characters, from going up and down slopes. Another fun form of copy protection happens whenever a character throws a grenade, which will trigger an infinite number of explosions to spawn around the player. And not just that, but whenever there is an explosion, the game will then make all explosions massive. And if a player breaks glass, the game's audio frequency is modified to an incredibly high value, resulting in all characters sounding like chipmunks. Rare certainly got creative with this one, but Nintendo have also gotten a bit wild with their anti-piracy measures themselves. One of the biggest titles on the Nintendo 64, and the one most likely to be the shining jewel in a would-be pirate's sights, is The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Just like every other game we've mentioned, Zelda utilizes a check for the correct CIC lockout chip, and if a chip other than 6105 or 7105 is detected, several measures are put in place. One alteration is made with how the code manages the fishing minigame. This measure makes it so that fish from the pond at Lake Hylia always let go after being caught for 51 frames, about 2.5 seconds, making the fishing minigame impossible. This in particular seems like a strange piece of anti-piracy, as the fishing segment isn't needed to beat the game, and is only needed if you want to 100% complete it. That said, a different measure will absolutely stop you in your tracks. If you're playing a pirated game, the bars found in Ganon's castle which block the exits during the escape sequence might give you some trouble. Zelda will normally open these bars for the player, but if the wrong chip is detected, the bars will simply stay in place. Zelda, however, will not. But probably the most bizarre change to occur involves the 3D model for adult Zelda during cutscenes. This can first be seen during the cutscene in which Sheik's identity is revealed, where Sheik transforms back into Zelda to reveal her with a rather extreme slick-back puff hairstyle.
Did you know? Brock wasn't always the first gym leader in the original Pokemon games. Illustrations by art director Ken Sugimori suggest a young child was initially the first gym leader. It's speculated that Giovanni replaced the child, and the first gym battle would have taken place in Viridian City instead of the 8th gym battle. The 7th gym leader, Blaine, originally had a different design. He initially wore a military uniform, which was eventually swapped out for lab attire. This was likely done to distance Blaine from Lieutenant Surge and to give Blaine stronger ties to Cinnabar Island. His appearance wasn't changed immediately, however, as early full-color art still uses this design. This design was also the foundation for Blaine's appearance in the Pokemon anime. In the original design documents for Pokemon, there was a charisma stat which impacted the player's chances of catching a wild Pokemon. This charm mechanic was likely replaced by the current process of weakening a Pokemon before catching it. The series has other interesting features that were cut. During development of X and Y, there were plans to include a translation machine. This would convert a Pokemon's cries into dialogue, allowing the player to understand what Pokemon were saying. This idea had to be scrapped, as writing dialogue for the 600+ Pokemon was impractical. One idea that did make it into X and Y were Mega Evolutions. The Mega transformations were made temporary not just to balance the game, but also for aesthetic reasons. Series director Junichi Masuda explained, "I really like Charizard, and I also like the Mega Evolutions of Charizard, but if it stayed that way, I'd miss the old Charizard." When creating a new game, Game Freak decides how many new Pokemon they're going to add before designing a single Pokemon. Masuda told Retro Gamer, "When I'm envisioning what the world is going to be like, I think about what kind of Pokemon people are going to encounter there, and then how many are we going to need, so I come up with a number first usually." Pokemon games have been altered or censored in many ways over the years. Books in the Canalave Library, in the Japanese version of Diamond and Pearl, reveal something unusual about the history of the Pokemon world. There was apparently a time when humans and Pokemon married each other. This game explains that this was a normal thing, because long ago, people and Pokemon were the same. These references to marriage were removed in the English translation, which only states that Pokemon and humans used to eat at the same table. Pokken Tournament uses the same title in all countries except for Germany, where it was called Pokemon Tekken. The title was most likely changed to avoid sounding like the German word Pocken, which means smallpox. Some trainer sprites were altered in the international versions of Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. The sailor was originally shown flexing his arm and slapping his bicep. This is a harmless gesture in Japan, but an obscene gesture in other countries, essentially meaning up yours. In Pokemon Stadium for the Nintendo 64, the entrance animation for Nidoqueen was altered in the international release. This is because the original Japanese version showed the Pokemon cupping its breasts. At the Rendezvous Ferris wheel in Black and White 2, the player can battle a trainer named Nursery Aide June. In the Japanese version, June admits that they're actually a man in drag, and were only pretending to be a woman so they could be a nursery aide. In the Japanese version of Pokemon X and Y, a trainer is implied to be transgender. In the Japanese game, the woman says, "I was a Karate King just half a year ago. The power of medical science is awesome, wouldn't you say?" The dialogue was changed in the English version, removing any indication that a medical procedure took place. Black Belt is the English equivalent of the Japanese Karate King class, which has no females. Although the group is exclusively made up of men, the title Black Belt implies no gender, unlike Karate King, which implies a trainer is male. The change in dialogue makes the English text much more ambiguous. The French translators for Pokemon seem to have more fun with their versions. In the French Pokemon Crystal, the wise trio are named Ken, Shu, and Rao. This is a reference to characters of the same name from the manga and anime Fist of the North Star. When playing Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire in French, the gym leader Brawly will say, "I discovered the secret of true power by staring at a Helix fossil for days and days." This appears to be a reference to Twitch Plays Pokemon. This was a live stream where viewers were able to play the game by commenting in the stream. Due to the chaotic inputs, the viewers would often open up the items menu and attempt to use the Helix fossil to no effect. Viewers joked about the recurring mistake, saying they were consulting the Helix fossil as if it were a religious oracle. The original Pokemon games were remade in part so that players could truly catch them all on the Game Boy Advance. Trading between the original Game Boy and the Game Boy Advance was impossible, and Game Freak knew this from the start of Ruby and Sapphire's development. They created Fire Red and Leaf Green so that players could complete their Pokédexes. Although tedious, it's possible to transfer a Pokemon from Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald all the way up to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. If the player does this, and speaks to the game director in the Cove Lily Motel with their transferred Pokemon in Slot 1, they'll be given a special Time Travel Award. The award will say that the player has an unwavering friendship and an unbreakable bond with their Pokemon. Game Freak has actually remade part of Pokemon Red and Blue in 3D. Santaloon Forest in X and Y is a remade version of Viridian Forest. Both locations share the same layout and feature the same wild Pokemon. Metapod and Kakuna can be found in both forests at level 4, despite the fact that Caterpie and Weedle normally don't evolve until level 7. As well as reusing their own material, it seems that developers have used content made by fans. While visiting Dewford Town in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, one of the houses has a map on the wall. This map appears to be a horizontally mirrored version of the Poke-Earth map from Pokemon fan site Cerebi.net, and shows all the continents from across the Pokemon world. A somewhat creepier secret is hidden in the introduction for the Elite Four member Phoebe. Just as the first scene fades away, a young girl can be seen in the background for a split second. She appears again in the third scene of the introduction, where she's hiding behind the player. There's a lesser-known secret in Pokemon Crystal. Examining the right side of the right staircase on the top floor of Celadon Mansion triggers a message. There's graffiti on the wall. Player added a mustache. In X and Y, there's an old man living in Anastar City who's been struggling with depression after the death of his wife. The player can give him any one of their Pokemon that's level 5 or lower to cheer him up. After defeating the Elite Four, the player can return to the house and discover that the old man has died. The player finds the Pokemon they gave the man, a Comet Shard, and a letter thanking them for the Pokemon that kept him smiling until the very end.
Did you know? Many GameCube games have differences between regions, often to censor violence, religious references, and anything perceived as unsavory. These changes even affected the system's best-selling game, Super Smash Bros. Melee. In the German version of Melee, and every subsequent Super Smash Bros. Game, Popo's name was changed to Pepe. This is because the word Popo means butt in German. Another GameCube exclusive that was somewhat censored is Pokemon Colosseum. In the international version of the game, Rui, who accompanies the character, had her shirt and skirt lengthened. This was to cover her midriff and make her overall appearance more family-friendly. There were also many regional changes made to F-Zero GX. In the Japanese version of the game, if the player asks Roger Buster during the post-game interview what he'd do with 1 billion credits of prize money, he'll say that he'd get a nice cold beer. However, if you ask him the same question in the English version of the game, he'll simply say he'd get a nice cold drink. In the Japanese game, the player can also ask Digiboy, "Do you believe in God?" They respond by saying, "Who believes in such delusions?" This question was removed entirely in the Western release. Another religious reference was removed from the Western release. In the Japanese version, the player can tell Black Shadow, "Your rivals are howling for revenge," and he'll respond by saying, "I'll send you straight to hell." This question and response were both removed in the West. Another religious reference was removed from Pikmin 2. In the Japanese release of the game, the silencer item is worth 666 Pokos. In all other releases, it's worth 670 Pokos. Since the number 666 is associated with Satan in Christianity, its price was likely changed in the West to remove this connection. Yet another religious reference was removed from the Japanese version of Baten Kaito's Origins. In the Japanese game, there's a scene where the character Sagi is tied to a cross. In the English release, however, the cross was changed to a slab. This was most likely to remove any religious symbolism or references to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Several GameCube games have also been censored to reduce violence and gore. In the North American release of Resident Evil 4, decapitations could occur through various means, such as the player being attacked by the chainsaw-wielding Ganado. Heads of certain enemies could also explode if they took damage from a powerful firearm such as the shotgun or sniper rifle. However, in the Japanese version of the game, any instances of decapitation were removed. This wasn't the only Resident Evil game to be censored in this way. In early Japanese trailers for the GameCube's Resident Evil remake, hunters can be seen slashing off the player's head, just like in the original PlayStation Resident Evil. However, the hunter's attacks were altered in the final game so that no decapitation took place. Kenneth's death was also changed so his head was still attached to his body when the player finds his body. These changes were likely made due to Japan's Sero Ratings Board and their strict views on decapitation in games. Interestingly, however, these changes were carried over to all regional variations of the game. The Japan-exclusive book, GameCube Biohazard Official Navigation Book, describes another way the Resident Evil remake was changed. Apparently, the staircase camera angles had to be altered due to one of Jill's outfits. Jill's unlockable Resident Evil 3 Nemesis clothes feature a very short skirt, so short that her underwear would have been on show if the PS1 staircase camera angles remained. The color of her underwear was also changed to black. This was so her panties were harder to see in reflections, such as at the water fountain. The GameCube exclusive Chibi Robo has many regional differences. In the Japanese version, the Free Ranger's weapons looked fairly realistic considering the game's art style. Their design was altered in the English version, where they were given noses and their guns were changed to look more toy-like. The GameCube had some interesting hardware for the time, such as its broadband adapter, which allowed for online play. Simply having online wasn't good enough for some developers, however. Battlefield 1942, the first entry in DICE's online-centric Battlefield series, was originally pitched as a GameCube exclusive. This plan fell through when DICE became unsatisfied with Nintendo's lack of a robust strategy for online gaming. Several more games were planned to have online functionality. F-Zero GX and Mario Power Tennis were both planned to feature LAN multiplayer, but this was dropped for both titles. In May 2001, Namco announced they were making 6 games with online play for the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube, but these games never materialized. Only a handful of games actually took advantage of the GameCube's networking features. Kirby Air Ride, 1080 Avalanche, and Mario Kart Double Dash all featured LAN multiplayer that let players race against each other using multiple GameCubes and TVs. Double Dash in particular allowed multiplayer for 16 players across 8 systems and 8 TVs. There were only 3 games released internationally that had true online multiplayer: Phantasy Star Online Episode 1 and 2, Phantasy Star Online Episode 1 and 2 Plus, and Phantasy Star Online Episode 3 Card Revolution. 2 Japan-only games also used online. The first, Jikyo Powerful Pro Yaku 10, was a baseball game with downloadable content. The other game, Homeland, was a unique RPG that let players host their own game servers for 35 other players. While the guests would cooperate to complete quests, the host would play the role of God by spawning items and monsters on the server. By default, the GameCube used traditional composite cables for audio and video output to the TV, but it also came with a digital video port. By using component cables, the system could output higher quality video than with standard cables. The component cables were only available through Nintendo's official store, and were made in small amounts. This was because the GameCube itself didn't contain the necessary hardware to convert the digital signal to the analog signal used for the component cables. This meant the hardware had to be built into the cable itself, making them expensive to produce. The digital output port was only built into early GameCube models. Systems produced after May 2004 with the DOL-101 serial number ditched the digital port. This was because Nintendo's own research found that less than 1% of GameCube owners were using it. In the years following their discontinuation, demand for the component cable surged among players who wanted the best video quality possible. Because of their extremely limited supply, prices for the cables skyrocketed on the second-hand market, going for as much as $250, more than the price of the GameCube itself when it launched. Over the course of its life, more than a dozen different colors and variants of the GameCube were released. As well as the default indigo, black, and platinum silver colors, there was also a pearl white color exclusive to Europe and an orange spice GameCube exclusive to Japan. There was even a brown GameCube, though this model was only for game developers. The Starlight Gold Edition, sold exclusively at Toys R Us Japan, is one of the rarest models in existence. Other rare variants include 150 units of a special white GameCube released only in Japan, and a custom MTV Contest GameCube, which only 5 are known to exist. There was also a symphonic green GameCube bundled with Tales of Symphonia, released in Japan and France. As part of the Char's customized box set, a red GameCube with a custom faceplate was bundled with a matching controller and Game Boy player, a special game demo disc, and a Gundam action figure. A Hanshin Tigers-themed GameCube was made available in 2003 to commemorate the Japan League Championship victory of the Hanshin Tigers baseball team, their first such win since 1985. There was also a GameCube with a Heineken faceplate, made as a prize for a contest where people bought 10,000 bottles of Heineken beer. A small number of GameCubes with custom faceplates were also given to employees of ATI Technologies to thank them for the work on the GameCube's GPU, codenamed Flipper. In later years, several GameCube games ended up becoming very valuable collector's items due to their rarity. Mint-condition copies of Pokémon Box and NCAA College Basketball 2K3 can sell for up to $1,000 or more online. Gotcha Force, a creature-collecting shooter released by Capcom in 2003, originally launched to mediocre reviews and low sales. However, the title eventually gained a cult following and became highly sought after, often going for $200 to $500 on the secondhand market. Demand for the game was so high that Capcom actually issued a new printing of the game in Japan in 2012. One of the rarest pieces of GameCube software, albeit one of the most obscure, is the official GameCube service disc. Starting in the days of the original Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo operated a line of hardware repair centers known as Nintendo World Class Service, and the service disc was used by this repair team to diagnose problems with GameCube hardware. After the service was shut down in 2003, all copies of the disc were recalled by Nintendo, making it an extremely rare find. In addition to its technical uses, the service disc contained quite a bit of strange hidden content. There are several songs in the disc's files that were presumably used for audio testing, including a rendition of the Lon Lon Ranch theme from the Ocarina of Time Rearranged album, a version of the Super Mario Bros. Theme from the Super Mario World Jazz album, and a sped-up version of Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding. The Images folder contains a few odd graphics, like a color-inverted picture of Mario, the logo of company ArtX, a subsidiary of ATI Technologies, and an image of the word dolphin surrounded by stars and a poorly drawn smiley face. Because there were plans to include 3D functionality in the GameCube before development costs made the feature impractical to implement, the service disc also contains images meant to test the system's 3D display. While most of the images were of generic in-game models, some of them were screenshots from the game Quake. The system had other unique additions. At Space World 2000, Nintendo announced a version of the GameCube's memory card that would house an SD card. This would potentially allow players to save game data to an SD card, dramatically expanding the amount of information that could be saved. However, this never came to fruition, at least not in its original form. The Japanese version of Animal Crossing released with a very similar device. This unique memory card used SD cards so that players could save screenshots from the game. The device is only compatible with Animal Crossing and Pokémon Channel. Did you know? In 1999, a 3D platforming game called 40 Winks was released by GT Interactive for the original PlayStation. While a version was planned for the Nintendo 64, negative reviews and poor sales of the PlayStation game led to the N64 release being scrapped. The cancellation came at the last minute, as the N64 game had already been reviewed by publications, and a strategy guide had been featured in Nintendo Power. In 2017, game developer Pico Interactive acquired the intellectual property rights to 40 Winks. Pico Interactive specializes in releasing titles for retro consoles, both by making new games or by acquiring the rights to unreleased ones. In February 2018, the company launched a Kickstarter campaign to fund the release of 40 Winks on N64. The campaign initially sought to raise $20,000, a goal which was met in its first day. The campaign closed after raising a total of $131,252 from over 1,700 backers. In November 2018, almost 20 years after its release on the PlayStation, 40 Winks was finally released on the Nintendo 64. Besides cancelled games, the N64 had many games that were censored, including Nintendo's own games. Cruisin' USA was originally released in arcades and later came out on the N64, with both versions being published by Nintendo. This was unusual, as the arcade version was far from family-friendly, resulting in the N64 game being censored. One difference between the two versions is the Trophy Girl, who wears more clothes in the N64 release. Interestingly, this Trophy Girl is actually adult film star Shyla Fox, who's credited in the game as Anutsa Hurling. The game's gear shift was reworked in the N64 build too. The arcade version called it the XL Power Shaft, which may have been too raunchy for a home release, so it was renamed the XL Power for the N64. Some of the arcade version's courses have animals walking across the streets, such as deer and cows. Whenever the player hits them, they explode into bloody pieces and slow the player's car down. These animals were removed from the N64 version entirely. During the final race through Washington, the player drives through a tunnel pasted with money. In the arcade release, players can see what appears to be Hillary Clinton's face on the bills, smoking a cigar. This seemed to be too much for the N64, where the faces were switched for a more inconspicuous Benjamin Franklin. In the arcade version, former US President Bill Clinton appears in a whirlpool with half-naked women waiting for the player to join in. The N64 version instead shows the player's car on a pedestal. One of the most heavily censored games on the system was Duke Nukem 64. This title, which is a port of Duke Nukem 3D, had many alterations. The game's PC version is littered with babes who were captured by aliens and could be freed by the player. In the PC game, pushing the action button makes them moan, "Kill me." The player can fulfill their wish, resulting in the babes exploding. The babes are still in the N64 version, but they have a more modest look and can't be killed. Interacting with them on N64 just prompts the message, "Babe saved." Alcoholic beverages were also replaced in the N64 game with more kid-friendly drinks such as cola. The mention of steroids was also swapped out for vitamin X in an effort to remove all references to real-world drugs. Another game censored from its PC release is Battlezone, with the N64 game removing all blood effects. If the player kills a pilot in the PC version, part of their body flies through the air, but in the N64 version, only the explosion itself is shown. Another censored N64 game is Forsaken. The game's European version is censored to have no blood splatter effects whatsoever. Players mainly fight against mechanical enemies in the game, but there's several missions where humanoid looters attack the player. In the North American version, the bodies of human looters fly apart whenever they're destroyed. There's even splatter sound effects when their bodies tear apart. However, this is all removed from the EU versions of the game. Another N64 game censored in Europe was Daikatana. Whenever an organic enemy is attacked in the North American release, purple blood is splattered around. However, the EU version shows sparks flying out of the enemies. The player also meets civilians and prisoners throughout the game. These NPCs can be killed in the North American game, but they're invulnerable in all European releases. Some of the N64's most unique peripherals were only released in Japan. The Suricon 64 was a fishing rod controller with a reel, and was compatible with Japan-exclusive fishing games, such as the Legend of the River King 64. A controller by Taito was specifically for its train simulation game, Densha de Go. The unique controller would plug into slot 3, a microphone in slot 4, and a standard controller in slot 1. The two levers control the train's speed, emergency brakes, and doors. Between the levers is also an indent where players can put a pocket watch to keep the time. The controller has the A, B, C, and start buttons, as well as select, which can act as the Z button to show how far the next stop is. The company Reality Quest also made a video game control glove for the N64, as well as the original PlayStation. Reminiscent of the NES's Power Glove, the control glove had motion-controlled inputs with 3 sensitivity settings, and was designed so every button could be pressed by one hand. Perhaps the most unique peripheral for the N64 was the biosensor. Created by Sega, the biosensor plugged into the controller and had an earpiece that clipped onto the player's ear. From there, the biosensor could monitor the player's heart rate. The biosensor was compatible with a single game, Tetris 64, which released only in Japan. The title included a special mode known as Bio Tetris, where the Tetraminos would fall faster or slower depending on the player's heart rate. In addition to the biosensor, Sega also made an arcade cabinet based on the N64 hardware known as the ALEC 64. The device was first made in 1998 and discontinued in 2003, but was never available outside Japan. The ALEC 64 failed to find much success, as only 11 games are known to be made for it. This included the soccer game 11-Beat World Tournament, the platformer Tower and Shaft, the shoot-'em-up Star Soldier Vanishing Earth, Magical Tetris Challenge featuring Mickey Mouse, multiple Mahjong games, and an erotic action puzzler called Vivid Dolls. The N64 also had some unique add-ons. A company called EMS Production released an add-on called the GB Hunter that could play Game Boy games on the N64. The GB Hunter came with a built-in cheat device and let players add color palettes to their Game Boy games. The peripheral needed an actual N64 cartridge plugged into it, otherwise the system couldn't boot the game. The GB Hunter also couldn't emulate any of the sound from the games it played, and would play its own piece of music on an endless loop. Another device known as the TriStar 64 was released by a Hong Kong company called Future Laboratory. The device allowed NES and Super Nintendo cartridges to be plugged into the N64, making the system backwards compatible with the NES and SNES. The TriStar 64 also included built-in cheat software, as well as a save editor. The N64 was home to many unlicensed cheating devices, the most popular of which was the Game Shark. An expanded version of the Game Shark, known as the Shark Wire, featured internet connectivity. The device plugged directly into the N64's cartridge slot and had ports for a keyboard and telephone cable. With a paid subscription, players could access the Shark Wire website to download cheat codes and transfer save data through their N64. The site also had articles on a variety of media topics and an email service. Shark Wire was geared towards children aged 7 to 14, and there were plans for unrestricted web browsing and online multiplayer in the future. However, the service ran for just 3 years before it was discontinued in 2003. One type of third-party accessory that became important to many N64 fans was the backup unit, such as the CD64. This was an add-on that could save and run custom mode, as well as modify save data and emulate games. Although the most common use of these devices was to play pirated games, they became popular as a tool for developing homebrew games. Though the homebrew community on the N64 isn't as big as some other platforms, several complete and unique games have been made, such as ports of Flappy Bird and the Pyoro minigame from WarioWare. One of the most fleshed-out homebrew games for the system is an Arkanoid clone called Dexanoid, which includes 50 different levels. In June 1998, Nintendo announced a 10-year deal with LodgeNet, an American company who supplied services like on-demand movies and high-speed internet to hotels. As part of the agreement, LodgeNet would install Nintendo 64s in thousands of hotel rooms across North America, allowing guests to play a selection of first-party Nintendo games for $6.95 per hour. The LodgeNet systems came with a unique N64 controller with several extra buttons to navigate the LodgeNet menus, and the controller itself could be used as a TV remote. These LodgeNet controllers weren't compatible with normal N64 consoles, but because most were only gently used while in service, the controllers have become popular items with collectors as a reliable source of replacement parts. The Nintendo 64's unique three-pronged controller allowed for several grip types. The most used grips were to use the middle and right prong or the left and right prong, but there are a few less used methods of holding the controller. Holding the left prong in the left hand and the middle prong in the right hand was used for a small handful of games such as Turok Dinosaur Hunter, which used this style as an optional left-handed control layout, and Pokemon Stadium, which used it for the Ekans' Hoop Hurl minigame. There was also a fourth controller grip method supported by some N64 games, which had players using the middle prong on two controllers at once. Because each controller had one analog stick, using two controllers allowed a game to emulate dual-stick shooting, making this grip popular in several first-person shooter games. It also appeared in Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, where the two sticks were used to control the twin engines of the player's pod racer in a similar style to what was shown in The Phantom Menace.
Nintendo and piracy seem to go hand in hand. Of course, piracy is a staple when it comes to any form of media, but Nintendo appears to make a concerted effort to combat piracy more than the rest of its competition. From actively working to take down ROM sites, or even including a broad statement on the company's position on piracy on their official website, for many years, the Big N makes sure that with each new hardware release to their name, they at least in some small part try and halt those that would illegally download or purchase counterfeit games for their system, and especially their handhelds. And let's not forget that they deleted 3,500 YouTube videos from a guy who just wanted to put the soundtracks online, even though they don't put them online anywhere else. Just thought it might be worth noting. Of course, the DS was a major player in the gaming space when piracy hit, and it could be argued that this rampant piracy contributed to the DS and its most popular games spreading through the popular consciousness by word of mouth. When cartridges like the R4 hit the market, games such as Pokemon, Mario & Luigi, and even Club Penguin was sampled by pirates. And these titles made their own efforts on the software side to try and combat pirates at every possible turn. The DS had many successes, some of which were original games, but a few of them were ports from earlier consoles. Chrono Trigger is no doubt one of the most reputable RPGs of all time and one of my personal favorites, originally releasing on the Super Nintendo. The DS version is held in high regard, and this version's anti-piracy measures are also no doubt inspired by the original release on the SNES as well. Even in a pirated version, the game will play completely fine during the opening moments, where the player attends the Millennial Fair. It is here that the game's time-traveling elements are introduced, setting the player on an adventure throughout the past, present, and the future. At least, that would be the case in normal circumstances. But if the game detects that it has in fact been pirated, the time gate will refuse to display, and the game will instead freeze. What makes this copy protection more interesting is that this is the exact same form of protection that was put in place for the original SNES release, showing us that even in the future, some things may remain the same. Although soft-locking the player is just one form of copy protection, it's a pretty common solution. After all, what better way to frustrate somebody that's pirated a game than to simply make their game freeze when the going gets good? Another softlock method that is popular among developers is to take an element of the game that is intrinsic to making progress and then simply making sure it doesn't work. Club Penguin Elite Penguin Force Herbert's Revenge served as a sequel to the earlier DS Club Penguin game, and this included protection to prevent piracy. Rather than just locking the game in place if it was detected that the player was running an illegal copy, it would instead prevent the player from accessing the Puffle Whistle throughout every mission. As the player needs the Puffle Whistle to call the 7 different elite Puffles, of course, an action required to make progress, the game becomes entirely unbeatable. But at least in this instance, the player could get a small taste of what the game has to offer, unlike some other DS titles. Capcom's Ghost Trick Phantom Detective is an interesting and somewhat lesser known title, which had an anti-piracy measure that would lull the player into feeling like they were getting the game rolling, only to halt them at the first instance. If the game detects that it's being played illegitimately, none of the usual in-game text will be displayed at all. This means that players will not only lose out on the game's story, but they'll essentially have no context or instruction at all to help them solve the game's puzzles. It is still possible to play the game, but players must already be aware of what they have to do. In other words, they would already have to have played the game legitimately in the past. Speaking of Capcom titles, do you guys remember Mega Man?
Must recover all the energy immediately, Mega Man.
It's been a number of years since the Blue Bomber was in the spotlight, but during the era of the DS, a new spin-off series was created called Mega Man Star Force. This was a follow-up to the other spin-off Mega Man series, Mega Man Battle Network. With a series of games that aim to portray a fully connected world where the borders between digital and physical space merge, it's not too surprising that piracy would be one element of the game that the developers were keenly aware of. And this game has a rather interesting bit of anti-piracy, in which the game will repeatedly display the same message. Hey, hurry up, touch the train, kid. While not quite the same as
all we had to do was follow the damn train, CJ.
But it's close enough. Whenever the player tries to skip this text, it will simply be displayed again, forcing the player into a position where they cannot progress, and they will simply have to quit the game. And then, go back to the GBA temp to see if the new patch has been released yet, not that we know anything about that. Another game which halts the progress of pirates is the sequel to Ace Attorney Investigation Miles Edgeworth, Ace Attorney Investigations 2, which was released exclusively in Japan. Considering the nature of the game's goal, investigations into legal cases in which you must thoroughly dissect statements made by various characters to discern who is guilty of committing a crime, this game's anti-piracy might seem a bit out of character. The title allows pirates to play the game almost entirely, though with the handicap of all of the game's dialogue being displayed in the Borginian language, a fictional language from the series that utilizes symbols instead of letters. This doesn't apply to all areas of the game, as some parts will remain intact, such as various buttons, character names, and the evidence that the player collects. Considering the game's genre as a visual novel investigative adventure involving information correlation, another harsh part of this anti-piracy is that the in-game organizer, where evidence and character profiles are stored, will have all of the descriptions for these items be replaced with a series of several crosses. This will probably make it pretty obvious to pirates that the game isn't playing ball, but some other titles were a bit more sly about tackling pirates. Dragon Quest V: Hand of the Heavenly Bride released in Japan in July 2008, and came loaded with a sly trap for pirates. In the days following the game's release, Japanese message boards began to be flooded with players asking how long it took before the player's ship arrived at the port towards the start of the game. For legitimate players, this sequence only lasts a few minutes, but for pirates, that ship will sail continuously forever, with some pirates waiting for hours before they realize they've become stuck in a loop. Players began to suspect that this was a form of copy protection, but other players believed that it may be a bug in the game's programming. These doubts were soon put to rest by Square Enix themselves, with their PR department telling Yahoo Japan, "If gamers are playing a pirated copy, the ship in the opening scene will never reach port. This is an anti-piracy measure we decided to implement." Unfortunately for Square Enix, these measures were quickly worked around, with patches and cheat codes being circulated that got players past the infinite loop. This was quite a clever attempt though, and ironically stole time from pirates that they'll never get back. This isn't quite the case with one of Square Enix's other DS releases, Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles: Ring of Fates. This time around, the game will actually boot and act as though everything is cool, but it really isn't. Pirates would find themselves enjoying their time getting to grips with the title, but it won't last long. After just 20 minutes of gameplay, the game comes to a rather abrupt end, and the text, "Thank you for playing," will be displayed. Almost as though the player had just finished a timed demo of what legit players experience, rather than the full game. This seems like quite a clever method of anti-piracy, as pirates got just a taste of the full experience and may have considered actually purchasing their own copy. While we're on the topic of Japanese RPGs, let's talk about the most successful in the entire genre. Pokemon Black and White made only a small effort to counteract piracy, but it was a very effective one. This entry into the Pokemon franchise actually included a new feature that involved a special bit of hardware in the game's cartridge, an infrared communicator that would be used to link with other copies of the game, something that isn't normally included in a DS game's cartridge. Of course, this gave the developers a unique element to work with in official cartridges that wouldn't be present on any flashcards or emulators. So, they were able to use this to check if the hardware the game was being played on is legitimate. Throughout gameplay, checks were made within the game's code to make sure that this communicator is present, such as when leaving the Pokemon screen, either returning to the overworld or looking at the status of selected Pokemon. If it's found that the infrared capabilities aren't present, then the game will trigger an anti-piracy measure that results in Pokemon being unable to gain experience, and at random points in the player's journey, the game will simply crash. Stopping players from gaining experience may seem entirely debilitating, but it is possible to beat the game without gaining any. Players can simply use lower level Pokemon to damage and catch wild Pokemon that are a higher level, and ultimately work their way up to catching legendary Pokemon and taking on the Elite Four, albeit with the aid of many health items. The same anti-piracy measures can be experienced in the game's sequel, Pokemon Black and White 2, where the infrared communicator would make a reappearance. Most emulators would quickly find solutions to prevent these issues from occurring, likely through spoofing the infrared communicator and stopping the checks from determining that the specified hardware is missing. Another method of solving this, however, is through cheat codes, which could be implemented into flashcards to disable the standard routine checks. It really didn't take long for the protection to be squashed, as with pretty much most of the anti-piracy measures you'll see in this video, but even stopping would-be pirates from playing the game for just a short period after release can result in some purchasing the game out of anticipation. Did you know? The Wii was a hotbed for piracy throughout its lifetime. In a report, the Wii was named the most pirated console of 2010, with almost 26,000 available torrents. The most pirated Wii game in both 2010 and 2011 was Super Mario Galaxy 2, which comfortably cleared 1 million downloads in both years. Not all of the Wii's unofficial content involved bootlegging though. Very soon after the console's launch, an independent website called DYKG hosted Flash-based games intended to be played with a Wii remote. Gamasutra even reported on DYKG on November 20th of 2006, just one day after the Wii's launch in North America and before the Wii's Opera browser was even available. DYKG was created to promote smaller developers and help them program games for the Wii's unique hardware. Additionally, the Wii was subject to a lot of homebrew software and hacks. An important figure in the Wii hacking community was Ben Bushing Bayer. While Ben didn't game much himself, he bought a Wii after playing one at his boss's home in 2008. Bushing tended to hack everything he owned, and the Wii was a prime target as it was a new piece of hardware that hadn't been cracked yet. Bushing was introduced to other Wii hackers by a co-worker, and they would pass ideas back and forth about cracking the Wii. Meanwhile, Nintendo would include the latest version of the Wii's system software on almost every game they released, presumably so players without internet access could update their console. But this also gave hackers a large amount of code to work with. The Wii's central processing unit was a PowerPC chip named Broadway. but hackers were unable to disassemble the Wii's software as PowerPC code. Further experimentation revealed that it was actually ARM code. ARM, which stands for Advanced Risk Machines, is an architecture software often used in lighter devices like smartphones due to its low cost and power consumption. Strangely, the Wii didn't seem to have an ARM chip anywhere. The team soon learned that the chip was buried deep within the Wii's graphics processing unit, named Hollywood. A hacker called Sega nicknamed the chip Starlet as a play on the Wii's Hollywood GPU and Broadway CPU. As well as controlling most of its peripherals, Starlet was responsible for the Wii's security, making it the major obstacle for hackers to defeat. But amazingly, this technical hurdle was overcome using a simple set of tweezers. The hacker Tumbink was able to obtain the Wii's encryption keys from his console's memory by going through the GameCube architecture. Running homebrew code in GameCube mode was easy, thanks to a better understanding of the GameCube. The problem was, running the console in GameCube mode locked away all of the Wii's features. The Starlet chip was also responsible for limiting the amount of memory in use while running in GameCube mode. Essentially, the Starlet would only let the processor see the lower 25% of the Wii's total memory. Important codes such as the common key that allowed the decryption of most Wii content were kept outside of that range, so it couldn't be accessed via the GameCube mode. By shorting some address lines using a pair of metal tweezers, Starlet would be tricked into changing which 25% of the memory was visible. Essentially, hackers could slide the window of visible data to show different sections of RAM. The Wii's memory was not cleared in GameCube mode, merely restricted, and so the hackers could use this trick to map out restricted segments, including the decryption keys. The plundered data was then sent to Tumbink's computer via a serial port soldered onto the GameCube controller port. The hackers chose the name Team Tweezers in honor of this, their first major breakthrough and the first dent in the Wii's armor. Bushing said the amount of hoops the team had to jump through spoke to the quality of Nintendo's security. Decompiling the code was a long and tedious process. With no documentation to guide them, the team had to infer the purpose of each line of binary code by examining and comparing the CPU, GPU, and the disk all at once. Each discovery made it easier to progress. A piece of code responsible for resetting the system in Wii Sports also helped the team understand the same code in Zelda. Team Tweezers were responsible for creating the earliest known way to install homebrew software on a Wii without hardware modifications, the Twilight Hack. Named after the Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, the Twilight Hack exploited the buffer overflow error caused when the console tried to load in an edited Twilight Princess save file. The file was manipulated so that Link's horse's name literally contained a small program. This program is much longer than the game's character limit, so it cannot be entered in the game legitimately. However, the game doesn't check the character limit while loading a save file, so when the game tries to load the horse's name into memory, it can load the program memory, which just so happens to be the next region that the system will execute. The hack runs a boot file from the root of the SD card, allowing unofficial content to be loaded on the Wii. In the wake of this discovery, Team Tweezer's homebrew channel saw its first public release with Beta 7 on May 24, 2008. The channel was intended to let users launch unofficial applications on the Wii, listing them from an SD card or USB mass storage device. Development of the Twilight Hack was tricky. Without access to the proper debugging tools, it was difficult to ensure that Twilight Princess crashed in a consistent way. Nintendo began to fight back as well. On June 16, 2008, they released System Menu 3.3, which was designed to check for and delete the Twilight Hack. This led to the release of the 0.1 Beta 1 version of the hack, which managed to circumvent Nintendo's fix. It took until System Menu 4.0 to be released on March 25, 2009 for the Twilight Hack to be truly overcome. But despite this, the relationship between Team Tweezers and Nintendo wasn't always adversarial. On July 17, 2008, Bushing announced on hackme.com that he'd contacted Nintendo to advise them about a potential security issue, one that would allow pirated Wii games to be played on an unmodified console. Bushing refused to disclose any details about the bug, only notifying Nintendo and asking for an engineer to get in touch with him. The decision was met with some backlash from the community. Bushing received multiple emails, some demanding to know why he was helping Nintendo, some asking him to divulge the information, and some even posing as a Nintendo representative to trick him into disclosing the details about the exploit. In response, Bushing's post was updated to include the addendum, "I did not post my email address here to invite you to debate this with me. Suffice it to say that I have put more thought into this than you have, and when you find your own exploits, you can decide how to handle them." Team Tweezers chose to present this bug to Nintendo for 3 reasons. Firstly, the bug could be presented as a piracy-related concern, allowing them to contact with official channels. Secondly, the bug wasn't useful for legitimate homebrew. And thirdly, it was a design flaw, and so Nintendo were unlikely to be able to patch it anyway. Team Tweezer's attitude towards the bug was reflected of their overall philosophy. They were completely disinterested in piracy, and they refused to enable any bootlegging through their hacks. Bushing wasn't worried about legal repercussions, as they hadn't broken any laws, and mod chips were far more problematic for Nintendo. Bushing expected a response from Nintendo only if the homebrew scene actively contributed to piracy. Unfortunately for Team Tweezers, it wasn't long before the homebrew scene contributed to piracy. On May 26, 2008, the hacker 1nCoco released the Wii WAD Manager 1.0. A WAD is a native Wii file for a game or app. The WAD Manager exploited a bug that let the software work as if it had an official signature, effectively blowing the doors to piracy wide open. It proved to be controversial as a result, and Team Tweezers refused to endorse it despite members Bushing and Marken being thanked in the credits for the release. In fact, the team took efforts to thwart its interactions with their homebrew channel. In the 1.0.4 update, a feature was added where the homebrew channel would turn itself upside down if it detected the user had modified its contents or installed it using a WAD manager. 1nCoco continued to be a controversial figure in the scene. In September 2008, he released an ISO loader for the homebrew channel, allowing ISOs to run on unmodified hardware, making pirated games easier than ever to run. Ironically, Bushing had warned Nintendo about that exact exploit a few months earlier. The ISO loader was leaked online before its official release, leading to 1nCoco quitting the project. Team Tweezers were annoyed with 1nCoco's conduct. Marken accused those of promoting the ISO loader of using Tweezers' work to promote piracy. He described 1nCoco's apps as thin wrappers around existing code or tools written by others. In a post titled "Thanks 1nCoco," Bushing credited the release of the first pirated Virtual Console release to 1nCoco's release of his NAND FS dumper, which exploited the Wii's permission system, letting it read titles on the console. Team Tweezers foresaw their homebrew efforts being used for piracy, which was one of the main reasons they never stopped releasing tools and code for the community. Bushing believed that Team Tweezers not releasing any more information delayed the spread of the piracy by around 4 months. He made an appeal to hackers' morality, saying, "Developers need to eat too," and offered practical reasons for not pirating games on the Wii. He suggested that piracy would speed Nintendo's response to exploits and loopholes and ultimately hinder the homebrew scene as a whole. Nintendo had already proven themselves to be shrewd strategists. In February 2008, Dell released their freeloader import disc in PAL territories, which let users bypass the system's region locking to play games from all around the world. In response, Nintendo updated the Wii with ISO 37 to block its use, but never bothered to activate the code. Bushing speculated that this was designed to stall Dell. At this point, the PAL discs had already been pressed, but the imminent threat of ISO 37 would stall Dell from releasing an NTSC freeloader until the patch had been implemented, but the imminent threat of ISO 37 would stall Dell from releasing an NTSC freeloader until a patch had been implemented and they could find workarounds. Bushing estimated that if Nintendo were to plug the hole that 1nCoco exploited with the NAND FS dumper, it would take months for him to find a way to downgrade the Wii's iOS. The scene's differing philosophies created a rift in the Wii hacking community. Team Tweezer were insular, withholding info and sharing bugs with Nintendo to help steer the scene clear of piracy. However, their detractors saw this as a needlessly elitist attitude, expecting Nintendo to group them all together anyway. The increasing popularity of WAD managers and editors increased scrutiny on the homebrew scene due to its flourishing association with piracy. Complaints also came in from users that edited their Wii files without proper expertise. One common cause of grief was known as banner brick, where a user would attempt to install or change an incorrectly sized banner. This would result in the Wii immediately crashing once it was past the health and safety screen, as though the system files were corrupted. Solutions to the problem were dependent on the user's console revision and whether or not they had homebrew applications such as BootMe installed before the brick. In a worst case scenario, a user may have to send the console to Nintendo to be fixed. The ease of Wii hacking led to the creation of many community mods and homebrew games, the most famous of which is undoubtedly Project M. Project M was a mod for Super Smash Bros. Brawl that tried to bring it more in line with Melee's gameplay. The Project M development team made it clear that they didn't support piracy or permanent alterations to Nintendo's systems. The mod could be installed using a legitimate copy of the game and a 2GB SD card. The project started in 2010 with a relatively humble goal of replicating Falco's melee moveset in Brawl, but eventually expanded to include Brawl's entire roster, as well as some additional characters like Roy and Mewtwo. The developers were careful to avoid introducing characters that might jeopardize their already tenuous standing with Nintendo. These included third-party characters that may have made Nintendo fearful of legal action, and newcomers to Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS that may have led Nintendo to viewing them as competition. Despite their best efforts, Nintendo banned the phrase Project M on their Miiverse messaging service and put pressure on Twitch and fighting tournaments to limit Project M's exposure. Project M was extremely popular, enjoying 3 million downloads over its lifetime, and was even featured in major tournaments. However, it was suddenly discontinued in December 2015.
Did you know? Many Game Boy Advance games were censored, including high-profile releases such as Mario Kart Super Circuit. Parts of the Japanese game were deemed insensitive by some, mainly due to the Shy Guys in the Sunset Wilds course wearing Native American war bonnets. Art for the Shy Guys was altered in the international release to remove the bonnets, likely due to the cultural sensitivity concerns among North American staff. This affected the course preview image as well as the Shy Guys themselves. Although the headdresses were removed, Native American teepees can still be seen in both the preview image and the course's background in the international release. Surprisingly, this wasn't the only Native American-related censorship in a racing game produced by Nintendo for the Game Boy Advance. F-Zero Maximum Velocity had several playable characters, including Nietzsche, a young Native American man who pilots the Windwalker. In the Japanese game, however, his vehicle was named Crazy Horse. This was a reference to the man of the same name, a war leader for the Lakota tribe in the 19th century. Crazy Horse took up arms against the United States in several battles, resulting in Native American victory, earning him notoriety. The name was likely changed once again due to concerns of cultural insensitivity by Nintendo's staff in North America. The ending of Maximum Velocity was also slightly censored, but for different reasons. In the Western release, the outfits for Jane B. Christie and Kamiko were modified to show slightly less skin. Another bit of censored content can be found in Dragon Ball Advanced Adventure. The game has a couple interesting localization differences between the European and American releases, with the EU version being closer to the original Japanese game. In the original game, when Shinron offers Pilaf any wish, Oolong will barge in and ask for some girl's panties. However, this was censored in the American version, where Oolong instead demands that Shinron give him the world's most comfortable pair of underwear. The underwear in question was also altered to look a bit more masculine in the North American release. Capcom's Mega Man Zero series was also censored outside of Japan. Defeating an enemy with a non-buster weapon in the Japanese version of the games would make robot enemies spill a kind of oil that looks like blood. This blood-like oil effect was removed in the North American and European versions of the games, either to avoid controversy or to ensure an E rating. This oil was also splashed heavily on the walls of the Robot Disposal Center in the Japanese version of Mega Man Zero, but in the international release, the walls are clean. Interestingly, the Japanese games already had a suitable for everyone regardless of age rating with the oil. Ports of both Doom and Doom 2 were censored on the GBA as well. In the original Doom, blood has been recolored to green and gore has been toned down in general. In the PC version of Doom, enemies hit with heavy artillery like rocket launchers often burst with blood splatter effects. In the GBA version, however, the hostiles do not burst. Instead, their regular death animation plays. In most versions of Doom, there are mutilated bodies placed throughout the game. In the GBA version, these bodies have either been colored green or replaced by a green pool of blood. Like Doom 1 on the GBA, the blood in Doom 2 is green instead of red, and blood splatter effects are reduced. One difference, however, is that mutilated bodies were removed outright in Doom 2. The health meter was also censored to remove blood when the player is heavily damaged. This wasn't the only way the games were censored. In Doom 1's E1M4 command control, there's a room about halfway through the level with an elevated platform in the middle. In the original 1.0 release of Doom on PC, this platform was shaped like a swastika. This was altered in later versions, including the GBA port, where two of the symbol's arms were removed. Doom 2 was altered in a similar fashion. The game's Wolfenstein 3D bonus levels were edited to cover up any offensive iconography, and a painting of Hitler was replaced by a painting of Wilhelm Strasse from Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Another retro title with a Game Boy Advance port is Super Ghouls and Ghosts. the game was censored internationally, with regional differences in both the Super Nintendo and GBA releases. Super Ghouls and Ghosts' final boss, Sardius, is named Samuel in the Japanese GBA release. In Hebrew, Samuel means venom of God or poison of God, and in Jewish lore, Samuel is the archangel of death. The name was changed when the Super Nintendo version was brought to the West, likely due to Nintendo's anti-religious reference policy that was enforced throughout the 90s. The same goes for the game's graphical changes, such as crosses being replaced with onks. However, it is curious why these regional changes carried over to the Game Boy Advance game in both regions, considering Nintendo's far more relaxed stance on religious material in the 2000s. A major selling point of the Game Boy Advance was its backward compatibility with original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, but this feature wasn't exactly perfect. Due to different audio hardware between the Color and the GBA, some games would experience musical glitches. One game, a music creation software called Pocket Music, didn't work on the GBA at all due to these hardware differences. That said, a fully functioning GBA version was later released. The only other Game Boy game known to be incompatible with the Advance was Chi-Chi Alien, developed by Pokemon series collaborator Creatures Inc. Its incompatibility stemmed from its gameplay relying heavily on the Game Boy Color's infrared sensor. Later on, the GBA Micro would do away with the backwards compatibility altogether in favor of a smaller design, a brighter backlit screen, and customizable faceplates that were only available in Japan and North America. Despite the Micro's upgrades, the device failed to meet Nintendo's sales expectations, selling only 2.5 million units worldwide, one of the worst ever sales records for a gaming handheld. Satoru Iwata, Nintendo's president at the time, admitted the Micro was a failure and attributed its lack of sales to a poor marketing campaign that was overshadowed by the much more popular DS. The GBA also had some interesting add-ons. One of the first was the e-reader, a peripheral that let players scan special cards to play games or unlock hidden content in other titles. It was released in Japan in December 2001, less than a year after the launch of the GBA, and would release in North America and Australia, but not Europe. Although the e-reader failed to find success in most of the world, it was a financial success in Japan, and was supported throughout the GBA's life. This resulted in some cards only being released in Japan, including sets based on Mega Man.exe, F-Zero GP Legend, Mario vs. Donkey Kong, and Pikmin 2. For games that were released internationally but had Japan-exclusive e-reader support, the games were usually tweaked so any additional features normally unlocked by the e-reader were readily available. However, this wasn't always the case. While Mario vs. Donkey Kong had secret levels that could only be unlocked with e-reader cards, just 1,000 packs of 5 cards were made. They were given away as part of a competition held by CoroCoro magazine in Japan, with a 6th card available at the 2004 Next Generation World Hobby Fair, making this series of cards extremely rare. Each card unlocked a single level in the game, though there are actually 12 levels hidden in the game's code, meaning 6 of these levels went completely unused. There are also secret levels in the North American version of the game, but without e-reader support, they're rendered inaccessible unless players resort to hacking. Given the e-reader's lack of success in the West, it's no surprise some of the cards have become valuable since their release. The Super Mario Advance 4 e-reader series included a total of 43 cards that could be used to unlock special power-ups, bonus levels, and other gameplay features. 5 of these cards were available exclusively through Walmart in the US, but because the e-reader was discontinued shortly after their release, these cards ended up becoming particularly rare. Complete sets of all the cards can sell online for as much as $60. Another valuable e-reader card is the Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire Eon Ticket card, which could be used to obtain the legendary Pokemon Latios and Latios in copies of Ruby or Sapphire. The card was given away as a promotional item at E3 2003, as well as in the September 2003 issue of Nintendo Power and at participating Toys R Us stores. The E3 2003 version of this card, which came in special packaging, has become a collector's item and sells for over $100 on its own. The rarest of all e-reader card packs, however, is the E3 2002 pack. It was a promotional gift that included 4 cards, 2 Pokemon TCG cards with Japanese backs, a unique version of the Game & Watch Manhold card with different art, and a special Kirby card that was used as part of a contest. Expo attendees could scan the card, which would then tell them if they'd won a prize or not. Of the 4, the Kirby card is the rarest, since most were simply disposed of after being used, and complete sets can sell for as much as $300. Another interesting fact about the e-reader is that some cards contain a tune that's usually hidden. Totaka's song is a simple 19-note melody that sound designer Kazumi Totaka hides in projects he's worked on. Cards P13 and P15 for the Japanese release Animal Crossing E contain the minigame Who's Done It, which has Totaka's song as the background music. This is unusual, as the song is usually hidden within a game rather than being blatantly on show. Another officially made peripheral for the Game Boy Advance was the Play-Yan. First released in February 2005, the Play-Yan was a media player designed for use with the Nintendo DS and GBA. By loading music onto an SD card and inserting it into the Play-Yan cartridge, the GBA could be used as an MP3 player or even a video player. Nintendo also made several minigames available on their Japanese website that could be downloaded and played on the Play-Yan. Because of its power consumption, the Play-Yan was not meant for use with the original Game Boy Advance, but was compatible with the SP. Although the SP lacked a traditional headphone jack, the Play-Yan cartridge came with one built in. One of the most unusual peripherals for the Game Boy Advance was the iCard Pro, released in 2004 by Biondo Racing Products. It was essentially a radio receiver that displayed information about auto racing events on the Game Boy's screen when used at select locations that supported the iCard service. The information could include everything from race results and lap times to individual driver profiles, and allowed for 2 different feeds to be followed at the same time.
Did you know? It was rumored that Nintendo would release a second edition of the Wii console with DVD functionality in 2007. Sonic Solutions was reportedly involved with the project, sending out a press release stating Nintendo would use their products to bring DVDs to Wii. Nintendo's public relations manager, Matt Atwood, confirmed the existence of this new Wii, stating it'd cost more than the standard edition due to the extra functionality. While the console never surfaced, Nintendo said it was still coming in late 2007. The twist to this tale is that DVD functionality is already built into the standard Wii console. The hardware is capable of DVD playback, but the function was never implemented officially, perhaps to save Nintendo from having to pay a small licensing fee with each console sold. DVD playback can be restored using homebrew software. Despite the Wii Remote's main innovation being its motion control, the wireless technology was possibly the most difficult part to perfect, taking 2 years to develop. The remote's wireless connectivity needed heavy fine-tuning. It worked well in ideal environments, but was easily interfered with. This fact can be seen in early Wii Remote and Nunchuck prototypes that needed a wired connection to the console. As an interesting aside, these early prototypes used the D-pad and A and B buttons from a Game Boy Advance SP, and the Nunchuck analog stick was taken straight from a GameCube controller. Another defining feature of the Wii was, regrettably, that it was an SD console. The Wii didn't have an option for HD output, an approach Miyamoto came to lament. In September 2006, he stated that while the Wii was not HD compatible, its successor would be. His original reasoning was that HD TVs weren't popular enough to justify adding HD output to the Wii. Most of the world still owned SD TVs, and he thought it better to offer people a new way to play with their existing TVs rather than demand they buy a new one. However, in 2013, Miyamoto said he wished the company embraced HD earlier. The advent of HD TVs came 3 years sooner than Nintendo anticipated. In fact, Japan was rapidly converting to HD TVs even as Nintendo promoted and launched the Wii. The Wii's launch, however successful, wasn't without its issues. On the 20th of November, a day after launch, IGN reported an update distributed through Wii Connect 24 broke faulty consoles. Running the initial Wii Connect 24 update on these faulty Wiis caused error codes 110213 or 32002 to repeat, rendering the console unusable. Nintendo offered to either replace or repair such consoles. If the player wanted to keep their save data, they'd need to send the Wii to Nintendo, waiting up to 2 weeks to play the console they bought on launch day. Some also reported that leaving the Wii on its side would make it overheat, even if it was on standby. Another issue the Wii struggled with was third-party support. Because the Wii lacked the processing power of the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, reworking games for Wii hardware would have taken considerable effort. This didn't stop some developers from trying, however. In December 2016, Red Fly Studios showcased several Wii prototypes of various games they conceptualized for the console. Among these demos were the original Devil May Cry, a reimagining of Namco's Dig Dug, Star Wars X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter 2, and most impressively a functional demo of Batman Arkham Asylum. Despite the Wii's comparatively limited power, Red Fly managed to reproduce many of the game's functions as well as its visual style faithfully on the Wii. Unfortunately, this demo wasn't pursued by the license holders. Nintendo made physical activity a focus with the Wii. However, a British medical journal study found the physical act of playing the Wii wasn't intense enough to replace real exercise. Wii players only expended around 2% more energy than those playing regular games. Nintendo's focus on health continued when at E3 2009, Nintendo announced the Wii Vitality Sensor, a device capable of measuring the player's pulse. It was intended to aid relaxation by monitoring stress, anxiety, and sleep patterns. It could also have been used in horror games to measure how scared the player was. However, this prototype was never released. According to Iwata, after a large-scale internal test, it was discovered the sensor didn't work consistently, only performing as intended on 9 out of 10 test subjects. While this ratio may seem high, it wasn't good enough for Nintendo. They would only be happy releasing the product if it worked on 999 out of 1,000 people, not 900 out of 1,000. And the Wii didn't improve everyone's health. In 2007, Dr. Julio Bonis awoke with pain in his shoulder, despite not having done much strenuous activity. He soon realized the pain was caused by playing the Wii too often, specifically Wii Sports' tennis. He coined the term Wii-itis in a letter to the New England Journal of Medicine, stating painkillers and a break from playing Wii allowed him to make a full recovery. Unlike with the real sport, a player's endurance is not a factor with Wii Sports' tennis, and so it's possible for a player to strain themselves unwittingly. Bonis sent the report after his friend complained of a similar condition. This was far from the first condition to arise as a result of playing video games, however. Space Invaders led to a condition called Space Invaders Wrist, a form of repetitive strain caused by mashing buttons too quickly. The Wii U controller was somewhat inspired by one of the Wii's more unlikely features. The light inside the disc slot notified the player when they got a message. There was a limit to how much information the light could convey, especially considered how sophisticated TVs had become in displaying information. The desire to create a version of the Wii's light that could convey more information led to the idea of a second, smarter monitor that displayed the status of the Wii. This idea evolved into the Wii U. The Wii Remote continued to be used with the Wii U, partly due to the success of the Wii Motion Plus add-on. Miyamoto considered this the Wii Remote's ideal form, and felt it revitalized the controller enough that Nintendo could continue to use it for the Wii's successor. At some point, the Wii Remote was intended to function as a television remote. This may have been tied to the scrap DVD functionality, but it was ultimately used in the Japan-exclusive TV no Tomo Channel G guide for Wii. The technology was adopted more fruitfully in the Wii U's gamepad. The speaker in the Wii Remote was included at the suggestion of Yute Saido, developer of Otama and Sega Dreamcast cult game Seaman. Both games make heavy use of sound. He advised Nintendo that with a speaker in the controller, the Wii Remote could ring like a phone, among other functions. Teams at Nintendo were enthusiastic about the idea, and after weighing the costs and benefits, included it. A microphone wasn't added due to cost and ease of use concerns. If the controller had a headset inside or attached to it, it would be more complicated to use. Nintendo faced many lawsuits as a result of the Wii's success and its proprietary technology. While they won most of their legal battles, in 2017 a jury found the Wii and Wii U infringed upon one particular patent held by Texan company iLife Technologies. While iLife accused Nintendo of infringing on many of their patents, the jury found Nintendo violated only one, a patent on motion sensing technology used to monitor the safety of infants and the elderly. Nintendo was instructed to pay iLife $10.1 million in damages, far less than the almost $150 million the company asked for. Nintendo appealed the case based on an improperly written description in iLife's patent, but lost. Due to the Wii's family-friendly image, many of its games were subject to censorship. However, some of this censorship was frankly unnecessary. A prime example of this can be seen in the PAL release of Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, and in all versions of Prime 3 in the Wii's Metroid Prime Trilogy release. In the game's briefing dialogue cutscene, Admiral Dane says,
"Damn, they're targeting the planetary defense system."
This line was censored in PAL and Trilogy releases, where the word damn is replaced with no. A similarly inconsequential change was made in the European version of Super Paper Mario. In North America, Dementio insults Luigi by calling his mustache a shag. This phrasing was changed in the UK as the word shag has sexual connotations. Instead, Dementio simply calls Luigi a pushover in the PAL release. Another Nintendo game censored in the UK was Mario Party 8. On the Shy Guys Perplex Express board, Kamek uses the word spastic in the North American release and original PAL release, which is an offensive slur against disabled people in the UK. Use of the word caused enough outcry for Nintendo to recall the game. Later releases swapped the word out with erratic. These weren't the only Nintendo games to be censored on the Wii. For Mario Kart Wii, certain names such as Hitler are banned from online modes. Attempting to connect with a forbidden name will instead display a message stating the user's name must be changed to proceed. This was so that online gameplay on the Wii lined up with Nintendo's safe and fun policy. Third-party games were also censored, such as the Wii-exclusive One Piece Unlimited Adventure. Although the game's localization was handled by Funimation instead of 4Kids, the character Smoker was still edited to remove the cigars in his mouth to line up with the 4Kids edit of the anime. Strangely, the cigars on his jacket remain untouched. Another Wii game that was surprisingly censored was Cars 2, the video game. In the German release, the intro cutscene was censored to remove the scene involving Gatling guns, and to remove the explosion from the tunnel that Finn jumps out of. No More Heroes' American release has comical amounts of gore. While it was expected that the game's Japanese releases would see reduced amount of dismemberment and blood, it was a surprise to most when the game's European release had just as much censorship. The North American and English European versions of games are usually very similar, but dissecting and beheading enemies can only be done in the American version. In the US release, the remains of dead hostiles will also explode in a cloud of blood. As well as gameplay, blood has been reduced or outright removed in the game's cutscenes as well. In December 2007, Grasshopper CEO Suda51 and Marvelous's Yashiro Wada made a joint statement about the EU censorship, saying, "We have chosen to release in Europe the same version as has shipped in Japan considering the broadly growing Wii market." Although No More Heroes was censored on the Wii, the HD port of the game, Heroes' Paradise, lost something special too. The N64 in Travis's home was changed to a Sega Genesis with a 32X and Sega CD attachment.
Did you know? The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Switch had been successfully emulated on a PC before the game even released in the USA. Using an Australian dump of the game's files, developers of the Yuzu emulator managed to get the game booting up past the title screen in mere hours. While it's still early days for the emulator, this was no doubt an impressive feat. Besides its already impressive games library, one of the Switch's most defining features are its Joy-Cons. The Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons were originally going to be sold in same color sets, but this was changed when someone at Nintendo accidentally snapped two different color Joy-Cons onto a Switch. General producer of the Nintendo Switch console, Yoshiaki Koizumi, stated, "We actually weren't thinking about having two different colors on the same console at the same time in the beginning. This was until someone slipped on one of each color Joy-Con onto a single console, and suddenly everyone gathered around and said, 'Oh, that looks great.' So at first it was red and red or blue and blue, but sometimes mistakes happen and they end up being the right mistakes." The Joy-Cons would also originally attach to the console using magnets, but this caused a few issues. Besides the risk of magnets interfering with the system's hardware and Wi-Fi signal, the console itself would often detach from the Joy-Cons and fall onto the lap of whoever was playing it. One relic of this iteration can still be seen in the final console, however. When the magnets attached, they made a snapping sound. This was found to be a very satisfying sound and was implemented with the final Joy-Cons. Nintendo also tried having the Joy-Cons connect to the Switch by attaching them via dish-shaped parts. All in all, around 5 prototype versions of the Switch and Joy-Cons were made before the final form factor was decided on. Joy-Cons were inspired by the Wii Remote, but not just in function. During the Wii era, Nintendo received a lot of feedback from players of Wii Sports and Wii Fit, asking for a smaller version of the remote that could be strapped to the body. Nintendo held on to this feedback and set out to make a smaller controller. Engineers realized a smaller Joy-Con-sized controller could attach to a handheld device, leading to the Switch's main innovation of being a hybrid console. The Switch has interesting secrets surrounding its creation, but it also has several secrets within the system itself. Data miners who dug around the Switch's internal files found some curious details. Lines of code referring to a VR mode were discovered while examining the system's 3.0 update in June 2017. By tinkering with the settings related to the mode, it was found that the Switch had the option for a virtual reality dual display. This was nearly 2 full years before the release of the Nintendo Labo VR kit, which finally made use of stereoscopic 3D. This isn't the only secret within the Switch. In September 2017, an emulator called Flog was found hidden in the system's code. The emulator was programmed to activate only if the system's internal calendar was set to July 11th, at which point it could be used to play the NES game Golf. Golf was one of the first games made by Satoru Iwata when he was working as a programmer, and July 11th was the date he passed away in 2015. In order to actually access the emulator, players would have to hold a Joy-Con in each hand and extend their arms outward, recreating Iwata's signature pose from the Nintendo Direct presentations. In an interview with Kotaku, Nintendo of America's then-president Reggie Fils-Aimé said, "It was identified by folks playing around in the firmware. We've got nothing officially to announce for that content or what the plans are for that content. So that's that. Certainly anything that pays respect to my friend Mr. Iwata is something that is near and dear to me personally. But in terms of that execution and what it was meant to do or what the plans are, we've got nothing to announce." Some Japanese fans likened the presence of the emulator to an omamori, a type of charm often used for protection or good luck. Further data mining found the emulator only worked on Switch systems with older firmware. Eventually, all references to the emulator were removed from the Switch's code as part of the 4.0 system update in December 2017. Another far more bizarre Easter egg was found in the Switch's photo album application. If a player hasn't taken screenshots yet, several demo images can be seen in the album, including one of a man looking at a phone. This particular image bears an uncanny resemblance to a popular Japanese meme. What's bizarre about this is that the original source of the meme is a screenshot from a Japanese adult film called A Midsummer Night's Lewd Dream. This raised eyebrows for many and seems a very strange thing to be referenced in a Nintendo product. The Switch enjoyed great success in the months following its launch, but this wasn't without controversy. In August 2017, tablet developer GameVice filed a lawsuit accusing Nintendo of patent infringement. Previously, GameVice had released a gaming tablet equipped with a detachable controller known as a WikiPad, a design they claimed Nintendo illegally copied with the release of the Switch. The lawsuit asked for both monetary damages as well as a ban on all future sales of the Switch. The case was voluntarily dropped 2 months later, but a second infringement lawsuit filed by GameVice in March 2018 asked the United States International Trade Commission to completely block imports of the Switch into the US. Sales of the Switch weren't affected by GameVice's lawsuit, and in October 2019, it was ultimately decided that Nintendo hadn't infringed on the patent. The Switch has seen an influx of ports from other systems, but some complain these multi-platform games often cost more on the Switch, which led to some coining the phrase Switch tax. While compiling data on the Switch's library of games, Nintendo news site Switcher compared the prices of games available on both the Nintendo eShop and Steam, and discovered a notable discrepancy in the price of multi-platform games. Digital-only games on both services generally cost 7.2% more on the eShop than on Steam, while games released both physically and digitally cost 17.8% more. Overall, games cost roughly 10% more on the eShop than they do on Steam. The main cause for this is the manufacturing cost of the Switch cartridges, which are notably more expensive to produce than the discs used by other systems, which in turn means the games are usually more expensive to purchase. Nintendo's policy also mandated all Switch games that get both a physical and digital release must have the same price in both formats. As physical Switch games are more expensive than physical games on other platforms, the digital versions are also more expensive on the eShop than they are on other digital storefronts, resulting in a sort of Switch tax. While some games had their prices changed for the system, other games had their content changed. The game Super Real Mahjong PV, which originally released on the Sega Saturn, came to the Japanese Switch eShop in March 2019. The game is a simple mahjong puzzle game, with a gimmick of rewarding players via anime nudity. However, the game was removed from the eShop shortly after its arrival due to some risque scenes that had insufficient censorship. Nudity in the game had been covered with a white bar of light in an attempt to avoid a Sero Z rating, an 18+ rating that usually leads to low sales due to a limited audience. However, the light bar hadn't been aligned properly, and some nudity could still be seen in the final game. This resulted in the game being temporarily removed from the eShop until a patch was developed to sufficiently cover up the nudity. Interestingly, this isn't the only adult mahjong game to be censored on the Switch. Zero Div's Tyson Hot Gimmick Cosplay Jan previously released on the PC and PlayStation 2, but was ported to the Japanese eShop in 2018. The game's release went off without a hitch, but a little while after, fans noticed the eShop page had changed. The game's splash image on the storefront had been swapped out for an edited, less lewd version. Another Switch title was found to be censored somewhat before it even released. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate leaked over a week before its street date, which led to a large chunk of the game's content being revealed on social media. This included parts of the game's Spirits mode, which celebrates a large number of gaming franchises. Not all of these franchises were represented in the same way as in their original games, almost certainly because of the game's low age rating. Art for several female spirits had their usual artwork censored to be less revealing. This included Mithra from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, who had her legs reshaded to look like she was wearing black tights, and her top was extended to cover more of her chest. Camilla from Fire Emblem Fates was also altered, with her chest being covered by her hair instead of it falling to the sides. Although some fans were annoyed at this, it's hard to deny that the changes were appropriate for an E10+ rated game. Despite this, Nintendo seems to be against censoring games. At a shareholders meeting in June 2019, Nintendo President Shuntaro Furukawa was asked about his stance on games being censored by gaming platform giants such as Nintendo. Furukawa responded, essentially saying he believed the ratings board is enough, along with the parental controls Nintendo offers. He even went as far to say that arbitrarily editing games could be damaging to the industry. This statement was noteworthy, as Sony had recently censored sexual content of games on their platform. Senran Kagura Burst Renewal, Nekopara Volume 1, Date Alive Rio Reincarnation, and Senran Kagura were all affected by Sony's policies on sexual content in games. Although Nintendo's stance seems to be anti-censorship, one of their most high-profile titles of 2019 was altered after its release. In September of this year, news circulated that a line spoken by the character Bernadetta in Fire Emblem Three Houses had been altered. Specifically, her English B support conversation with Byleth had been seemingly toned down in the title's 1.02 update. Translation enthusiast and Fire Emblem fan Cantopia was curious if this was really a case of censorship and investigated the updated dialogue and compared it to the original English and Japanese versions. Surprisingly, the language used in the English 1.02 update was closer to a literal Japanese translation. However, translating from Japanese is rarely this simple. Cantopia went on to explain how, although the literal idea of Bernadetta being tied to a chair as a training method to make her a good wife was intact, some of the nuance was lost. The original English was made more intense to convey Bernadetta's implied feeling on the matter, which would have been lost with a direct translation. Whether or not this can be called censorship seems to be up for debate. Some fans believe the updated text either doesn't change the intent of the line or is more authentic to the original Japanese version, while others believe toning down the English text is censorship regardless of what the change was for, and that it lessened the impact of the conversation with Bernadetta. Did you know? The Nintendo DS can be used to spread malware, as demonstrated at DEF CON, a hacking convention in Las Vegas, Nevada. At the con, two men named Ki Chan-an and Dong Ju-ha demonstrated a variety of ways the DS could be cracked and infected in order to raise awareness. For example, malware can be placed in a pirated copy of a game, then uploaded online where it can spread to other systems. After the code is loaded onto the DS, the malicious code can take over the network the DS is connected to and spread the malware to anything from computers and smartphones to smart TVs. Interestingly, malware existed on the Nintendo DS as far back as 2005. One example is Trojan DS Brick A, which was often disguised as a ROM loader. People were often tricked into using it with their DS, where the code would immediately erase the DS's firmware and other critical functions. The system would become inoperable, or bricked, and the screen fittingly displayed a brick wall. Another result of hacking the DS was inevitably piracy. According to a report by the Computer Entertainment Software Association in 2010, Pokémon Platinum, Diamond, and Pearl were the three most pirated games on the Nintendo DS. According to the CESA, the trio were pirated 5,375,178 times in Japan alone, costing Nintendo an estimated $269 million in lost sales. In an effort to combat the DS's rampant piracy, Nintendo joined forces with 54 other Japanese companies, including Square Enix, Capcom, and Tecmo. Together, they lobbied the Tokyo District Court to ban the sale of R4 carts in Japan. R4 carts were a popular brand of flash cartridges which were able to run ROM files directly onto the DS, including illegally obtained games. While the petition was ultimately successful, the ban only affected the R4 brand in particular, leaving many competing flash carts to fly under the radar. Nintendo followed this up with a suit against the Magicon flash cart brand, which they also won. However, stores continued to sell Magicon and other flash carts regardless. Nintendo filed yet another lawsuit seeking compensation for damages from flash cart sellers. The company also set up a website asking people to report retailers selling flash carts and other piracy-related devices and pirated games. In South Korea, the Korean Customs Service cracked down on a DS piracy ring charged with selling over 90,000 pirated games, game copiers, and illegal contraband worth an estimated $87.2 million. In an attempt to evade authorities, the ring operated their business out of internet cafes and on websites based in other countries. Some of the pirates even hired employees to help manage their stores, paying them out of bank accounts created with false names. Nintendo's crusade didn't go over so well in France. Nintendo suffered a major loss in a lawsuit against Divinio Group, a French flash cart manufacturer. The suit went all the way up to France's highest court, where the judge ultimately ruled Nintendo was in the wrong for trying to deny users the right to use flash carts. Furthermore, the judge pushed Nintendo to be more supportive of independent development. Unsurprisingly, Nintendo wasn't keen on the idea and took precautions to make the next iteration of the DS, the Nintendo DSi, unhackable. However, hackers announced they'd cracked the system just 3 days after its launch. Nintendo attempted to fight back through firmware updates. For example, while the DSi's 1.41U update claimed to provide behind-the-scenes improvements to the system's performance, it actually focused on anti-hacking measures. The update attempted to lock out a number of the most popular flashcart brands. Many DS flashcarts had updatable firmware of their own though, giving flashcard users a way to respond to and circumvent Nintendo's attempts to lock them out. Although Nintendo ceased updating the DSi in 2012, hackers have continued to find new methods to crack the handheld. For example, a popular hacking method using the DSi's Flipnote Studio app became impractical on new systems when the DSi shop closed in 2017. This effectively meant anyone who didn't already have Flipnote Studio installed could only hack their DSi by modifying the handheld's hardware inside. Then, in late May 2019, hacker Shutterbug2000 found a new method dubbed the Memory Pit, which exploited a vulnerability inside the DSi's camera app. Since the app came pre-installed on every DSi system, this once again opened the doors to DSi hackers everywhere. As well as adding anti-hacking measures and firmware to curb piracy, many developers, including Nintendo, placed anti-piracy measures in their games. Some efforts were straightforward, such as with Kirby Mass Attack, which simply prevented the game from booting or progress from being saved. Other measures were sneakier, like in Dragon Quest V: Hand of the Heavenly Bride. If the system detects a pirated ROM, the game will play out as normal for a while until the player reaches a ship. From here, the game will be stuck on an endless loop, with the ship never reaching its destination. A simpler variation of this technique was used with Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles: Ring of Fates. If the DS detects the game as a pirated copy, the play session will be cut short after 20 minutes and the message, "Thank you for playing," will appear on the screen. The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks also attempted to stop players from playing a pirated copy. In this game, the touchscreen's UI, which lets the player control the train's speed and movement, will never appear if the game isn't a legit copy. This means players will inevitably fail very early on in the game and be unable to progress. Possibly the most creative anti-piracy measures can be seen in the DS version of Michael Jackson: The Experience. If the system detects foul play, the game won't display vital touchscreen cues, and also drowns out the game's music with the sound of vuvuzelas. Vuvuzelas entered the Western mainstream thanks to the 2010 FIFA World Cup in South Africa, where South African fans constantly used vuvuzelas. This inadvertently drowned out anything else in the stadiums and annoyed many. Despite Nintendo's battle against hacking, most hackers aren't pirates at all. In fact, the DS has a lively homebrew scene that enjoys creatively and legally using their DSs in a number of imaginative ways. For example, Steve Chapman grew tired of lugging around his heavy, cumbersome, energy-hungry laptop when using his DSLR camera, pushing him to look for a smaller alternative. Chapman wrote, "After mentally specking out what I would need, I realized the solution was right in front of me, because I bring it with me for Mario Kart DS wireless races on long night jobs." Chapman made his own specialized program and connected the camera's cord through the DS's Game Boy Advance cartridge slot. After some experimentation, Chapman's DS DSLR creation was able to outpace his laptop in performance. Chapman was even able to use the DS's built-in microphone to have his camera take pictures via audio cues, saving him hundreds of dollars on buying an official accessory for the same purpose. Other hackers have looked to software modding to expand what their DSs can do, leading to the creation of many homebrew apps. For example, the homebrew app Moonshell DS allows users to turn the handheld into a multimedia player. DS Twitter and FB4NDS allows DS users to post on their Twitter and Facebook accounts via the handheld, and the Remote Touch app can be used to control your computer via the DS. There's hundreds of homebrew applications, and entire communities have cropped up around their development. The DS is made for a popular emulation device too. There are custom-built DS emulators for everything from the NES and Genesis/Mega Drive to more niche programs like Scum MVM, which emulates point-and-click adventure games. Of course, people didn't forget about the games. Many hackers have used their skills to alter and improve some of their favorite games via ROM hacks. The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks D-pad controls ROM hack allows gamers to play Spirit Tracks with more traditional button-based controls. Other ROM hacks add new characters to Super Mario 64 DS, including Waluigi, Donkey Kong, and Sonic the Hedgehog. Meanwhile, Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow Definitive Edition seeks to completely overhaul the original game with new character portraits, a reworked luck system, tweaked controls, bug fixes, and other quality-of-life improvements. Some ROM hacks change up the base game entirely to create a new one instead, such as New Super Mario Bros. 3. This hack is a complete remake of the original Super Mario Bros. 3 using the new Super Mario Bros. Engine, and includes custom content as well. On the other hand, some hackers have created their own entirely original homebrew games. Still Alive DES is directly inspired by Valve's Portal, but reworks the concept into 2D. Lone Wolf DS officially takes Joe Denver's Choose Your Own Adventure game books and recreates them on the DS. The game handles all of the dice rolls and stats, allowing the player to focus on the story. These games and many more are completely free, requiring only a flash cart to enjoy. Hackers have even managed to bring the Nintendo DS's Wi-Fi capabilities back online after Nintendo shut down its servers in 2014. Programmer Michael Lely recalled, "I'd been following another online service revival for the Resident Evil Outbreak games. However, because the US versions of those games use a different network that never got analyzed in time before it was shut down, they'll probably never be supported. I didn't want that to happen to literally every DS and Wii game, so I went to work recording data from as many games as I could, and trying to get others to help." After being donated a server to use, Lely and a group of like-minded hackers joined forces to build a Python-scripted alternative to Nintendo's Wi-Fi service. Using the homebrew server, compatible games once again function as they originally did, with working friends lists, matchmaking, leaderboards, and other online features. The homebrew server also periodically sends out heartbeat signals to ensure everyone in the party is still connected. The team has since focused on improving the server and expanding its compatibility among the DS's library. Brenton, a member of the team, stated, "The project has since grown to be much more than what I envisioned, and I'm grateful to have people who are willing to dedicate their time and skill to helping out in whatever ways they can. I'm happy with what has been accomplished, which is enough to make me feel like my time and energy has been put to good use."
Did you know? The Switch's hacking scene has often been compared to a cat-and-mouse game between hackers attempting to crack the Switch and Nintendo's efforts to stamp them out. For instance, the Switch's 7.0.0 update used a scrambled batch of code in an attempt to slow hackers down. This ultimately bought Nintendo a mere 4 hours before hacker Elmiroric cracked the update. Nintendo has not responded to hackers lightly, outright banning the Switches of identified hackers from accessing online services. Reports have surfaced that Nintendo even banned unhacked Switch consoles that merely connected to hacked Switch consoles. A bug found in the Switch's NVIDIA Tegra X1 allowed hackers to access the Switch's boot ROM to install a range of programs on the Switch. Hacking group Fail Overflow explained, "This bug is in the recovery mode, which is a USB-based rescue mode intended for initial flashing of Tegra devices and recovery of bricked devices. The recovery mode only allows signed images to be loaded, but Thanks to the bug, arbitrary code execution is possible. By overflowing the recovery mode with data from another computer, hackers were able to circumvent Nintendo's security methods. This led to some pretty interesting programs running off the Switch. For instance, some hackers transformed the Switch into a handheld Linux machine, capable of running the Dolphin GameCube and Wii emulator. As the bug was on a hardware level in the boot ROM, it cannot be patched by Nintendo through software updates. However, hackers noticed that Nintendo quietly released a hardware revision of the Switch around July of 2018. This new model had a new boot ROM specifically to thwart the exploit. Nevertheless, the millions of original Model 1 Nintendo Switches released before the hardware revision remain permanently hackable to this day. Despite Nintendo's known zero-tolerance approach to hacking, one hacker spoke up. Kate Temkin, creator of a Switch cold boot software launcher, Fusi Gele, personally disclosed the details of her exploit to both Nintendo and Nvidia. Temkin wrote, "I can tell you, it wasn't fun to find a bug with such a broad impact. It significantly complicated the ethics involved. Given the potential for a lot of bad to be done by any parties who independently discover these vulnerabilities, I thought it best to disclose this immediately." The hacking group Fail Overflow also revealed the information around its hack, and distanced themselves from pirates, saying, "The bug will be made public sooner or later, so we might as well release now along with our Linux boot chain and kernel tree, to make it very clear that we do this for fun and homebrew and nothing else." An example of for fun hacking is German Android developer Max Keller's experiments installing Android onto the Switch. There's also Feebird, a homebrew application that allows users to overclock their Switch's GPU to potentially achieve better in-game performance. Indie game developer Amir Rajan attempted to join in on the fun by secretly including a Ruby code editor and interpreter in his eShop game, A Dark Room, as an Easter egg. By connecting a USB keyboard and pressing the tilde key while running the game, players could effectively turn their Switch into a Ruby programming machine. After the game's release, Rajan posted how to access the secret online. This surprise was not well received by Nintendo, who promptly removed the game from the eShop altogether. A Darkroom's publisher, Circle Entertainment, was left scrambling to deal with the fallout. Rajan told Eurogamer, "I deeply regret how this has blown up. A simple toy sandboxed environment has been framed as this massive exploit. It was a last-second spark of inspiration, and I snuck it in, assuming that plugging in a USB keyboard and pressing the tilde key wasn't part of the test plan. I don't know what to say except I'm sorry. And all I wanted to do was allow kids to discover what I discovered 25 years ago." To be fair to Nintendo, seemingly innocent Switch hacks have been abused in the past. For example, hackers managed to break into the Switch's dev menu, an application used by developers for creating content for the system. A hacker going by Reisi Yukaku discovered a means of successfully uploading custom profile avatars onto the Switch that could be seen by other players. Unfortunately, a select number of individuals used the exploit to upload especially lewd images as their profile pictures. Reports of gamers running into their balloons in Super Mario Odyssey's Luigi's Balloon World mode surfaced soon after. Reisi Yukaku lamented, "I don't condone that behavior, and this is why we can't have nice things." The story made waves through the gaming press, prompting a Nintendo spokesperson to officially comment on the matter. The spokesperson said, "A very small number of consumers have been using modified Nintendo Switch systems to display inappropriate or unauthorized material in certain online games. Nintendo always strives to provide a positive experience for all consumers, and this includes continuously monitoring all threats to its product security and taking swift and strong action to prevent them. Modified Nintendo Switch systems have been banned." Trolls are far from Nintendo's biggest concern, as there's a darker side to the Switch hacking scene: piracy. Pirates have managed to leak numerous Switch games, such as Diablo 3, Dark Souls Remastered, and Super Mario Party, before they even hit store shelves. While many games are leaked a few days before their official release, this isn't always the case. Pirates managed to get hold of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate almost 2 entire weeks before the game's launch. Posting pre-release games online isn't a simple process, with middlemen operating between pirates and leakers. These middlemen safely hand over dumped games from leakers to the pirates, who make sure the middleman's identity is not revealed. there can be others involved as well, such as those who reverse engineer Nintendo's tools and programs to break them open for hacking. There's also coders who create and improve pirating software, among others. Some people have managed to download games early, directly from Nintendo, by using software to gain access to the company's servers. Upon obtaining the game keys, which are typically used by reviewers to unlock digital review copies, the games are opened up for anyone to play. Even then, playing a pirated game isn't as simple as downloading a file. Instead, pirates must access the Switch's recovery mode, download and install a boot menu to launch homebrew software, and then use another custom program to actually play the pirated game. Though hacking on the Switch has been a long, collective effort, not all hackers play nice. For example, one particularly devious pirate uploaded a version of D-Author to 4chan. D-Author is a piece of piracy software typically used to generate authentication tokens to connect a computer to Nintendo servers. However, this version of the program had been maliciously altered to steal each user's Switch certificate, an important code unique to every Switch console that allows the system to connect to Nintendo's servers. It would then upload the certificates to the pirate's own server. Simon, D-Author's original creator, suspects the malware was created in a huge pirating scheme. He told Motherboard whoever did this required lots and lots of certificates, as they knew they'll get caught out, pinpointed by Nintendo and banned quickly. In retaliation, Simon created a spamming program built to upload random nonsense onto the pirate's server, in hopes of overloading it. Another user went as far as to dox the pirate. Incidents like these aren't uncommon on the Switch's pirating scene either. A group of pirates under the banner Team Executor have attempted to profit from Switch piracy by selling their own pirating software. Executor's SXOS is a custom firmware that claims to make pirating easy, allowing users to play games on the Switch directly from a microSD card. Despite being pirating software, SXOS comes with some particularly nasty anti-piracy measures. The program contains a brick code that will completely lock up the Switch's eMMC internal memory, basically rendering the console useless if it detects the user is trying to crack the program. SXOS's brick code, along with accusations that Executor has stolen work from other hackers to create their firmware, has earned the team a number of enemies among the hacking community. Kate Temkin stated, "I completely detest what I've seen of their practices and methods. Not just do they publicly endorse piracy and seek to profit from keeping information to a few people, but they're also willing to drop a 0-day that affects a broad swathe of devices on the public without any responsible disclosure." All in all, I think that Team Executor seems to be without morals or scruples, and I am happy to do as much as I can to reduce their profitability and thus de-incentivize these kinds of awful behavior. Nintendo, for its part, has gone a step further than just wielding its ban hammer. They devised a means to ban the pirated games too. Each Switch game card has its own unique certificate built in from the factory, just like the consoles themselves. Digital eShop games are coded to specific consoles and Nintendo accounts upon purchase. By tracing these certificates, Nintendo can easily determine whether a game card is an original legitimate copy and if a user's account legally owns the digital games they play. For example, if someone grabs a pirated Switch game that has been dumped online, Nintendo can recognize the duplicated certificate and ban not only the pirated copy, but the original game card, as well as every subsequent pirate copy of the game as soon as it goes online. While pirates can attempt to avoid being banned by strictly playing illegally obtained games offline, Ars Technica writer Kyle Orland hypothesizes the Switch's system firmware could also theoretically detect pirated games being played offline, then bury a flag in the hardware to activate a network ban the next time the player logs online. This method has raised some concerns, as those who purchase pre-owned Switch games could unwittingly buy a legitimate game card that has been permanently banned. Regardless, Nintendo hasn't stopped there, and has even started taking pirates to court. In December 2018, Nintendo of America filed a lawsuit against California resident Mikhail Uskadulnak, who sold and installed Team Executor's piracy products onto Switches as well as other pirated content through OfferUp. Nintendo alleges that Mikkel illegally hacked 100 Switch consoles and expects $150,000 for each copyright infringed. Furthermore, Nintendo hopes to sue anyone else involved with Mikkel's pirating operation, such as those connected to Team Executor. The team stated, "We believe even in the USA, our product should be absolutely legal, but ultimately it will be on this court to decide. We hope it will be with absolute fairness and not under the pressure of another big corporation."
Did you know? There are 2 pornographic parody movies of Super Mario Bros. Called Super Hornio Brothers 1 and 2, which are actually owned by Nintendo. Nintendo bought the rights to these movies after their production in order to stop any and all distribution of the films. The existence of these films was rediscovered in 2008 on the Something Awful forums, whose members eventually managed to hunt down a copy of the second movie. This isn't the only piece of lewd material connected to Nintendo. Super Mario Strikers has an unused promotional poster that was made to potentially advertise the game. The ad was ultimately rejected, likely due to its visual similarity to male reproductive organs. In the image, 2 soccer balls dangle from a net bag, with the quote, "You're gonna need a pair." Nintendo's marketing department aren't the only division that have made some regrettable mistakes. New Super Mario Bros. 2 has multiple typing and grammatical errors in both the US and UK localizations of the game. Some examples are an incomplete Street Pass notification in the UK version, and an entirely overlooked temp text message in the place of an error message in the US version. The Mario series has seen several plans that didn't pan out as intended. The idea for Super Mario Maker was actually patented in 1994. The game was planned to use a keyboard and mouse, as well as controllers, and Nintendo even proposed an online system so that players could share their creations. Another idea that didn't pan out as expected has to do with Super Mario 3D Land. According to director Koichi Hayashida, Cape Mario was originally considered as a power-up for the game. However, the cape was ultimately put aside in favor of Tanuki Mario, which had a similar function. Interestingly, in an early prototype stage of Super Mario 3D Land's production, the game's developers used the Mario 64 level Whomp's Fortress to test the game. The level was even shown off by Koichi Hayashida at a Game Developers Conference 2012 panel. Speaking of Super Mario 64, the game seems to borrow a sound effect from an unlikely place. The sound for entering a Bowser course seems to come from Hotel Mario's third main cutscene when Mario enters an orange pipe. Hotel Mario has a few secrets of its own as well. The game's Stomp Effect sprite has a peace symbol hidden within it. This is barely noticeable as the symbol is a similar color to the rest of the sprite, and the entire animation is only on screen for a few frames. Hotel Mario also has a series of date-based Easter eggs. The Here We Go screen is swapped out for a holiday message depending on the date, covering various holidays. This is true for both the English and French versions of the game. Other Mario games have some interesting Easter eggs. In the CD-ROM Deluxe edition of Mario is Missing, there's hidden audio that references Star Trek. An unused audio file uses an excerpt from the Star Trek The Original Series episode The Ultimate Computer, where the character Daystrom talks about his colleagues mocking him.
Colleagues laughing behind my back at the boy wonder.
The audio file is named Pat.wave, which is possibly named after Pat McCarthy, one of the game's programmers. Super Mario 3 also has a rare situation that almost never occurs. If the player tries to make Mario slide while wearing a hammer suit in Super Mario Bros. 3, Mario will go into the suit's shell. However, if Mario obtains the hammer suit while sliding, an animation of Mario sliding with the hammer suit is used. This is the only time the animation can be seen. In the original Mario Party, there's also a near-impossible scenario that can normally only be seen by using cheat codes. If the player manages to get 99 stars in a single game and meet up with Toad, Toad will tell them they don't have any room for any more stars and can't collect more unless they lose some of the stars they already have. Another interesting detail can be seen in Mario Party 4's Order Up minigame. In the minigame, there's a poster with the words Kinopio Burger on it. Kinopio is actually Toad's Japanese name, which means the game's localizers forgot to translate his name or replace the image. As well as interesting secrets, the Mario series has dealt with a few instances of censorship over the years. In the Japanese version of Mario Party 2, the ending for Western Land featured real guns and bullets. The ending was changed in the international release so that the guns shot out corks instead. Mario Party 8 was also affected by censorship and was recalled immediately after it was published. In the press release, Nintendo stated the game was recalled due to some discs containing the wrong version of the game. Video game retailer Game elaborated on this, explaining that Mario Party 8 was recalled due to some copies included including an offensive word. This turned out to be a line by Kamek, who says, "Magikoopa magic, turn the train spastic." The word spastic is seen as a derogatory word that mocks the disabled in the UK and could have caused offense. The game was released again shortly after, with the offending word replaced by erratic. After the release of Mario Party 8, most first-party Nintendo games published in the UK had tweaked dialogue that better suited Britain's culture and use of English. This can be seen in Super Paper Mario, where an instance of the word shag was removed in the UK version. Shag was originally used to describe Luigi's mustache, but the entire scene was reworded as shag is a sexual slur in British English. The UK Virtual Console release of Super Mario RPG also alters a line spoken by Croco early on in the game. The word bugger was changed to pest, as bugger, when used as a verb, is a British slur for sodomy. This version of Mario RPG also toned down a few spell animations due to the original effects using flashes of color that could trigger an epileptic fit. Super Mario Galaxy was the first Mario game to be officially localized to Canadian French for Quebec. In the Quebec localization, NPCs such as the Lumas and the Toad Brigade use a Joual dialect. Joual is a stigmatized French-Canadian dialect that has been influenced by English words and grammar and is often used by working-class people. This localization choice sparked a minor controversy, with representatives of the Quebec Office of French Language criticizing it for promoting poor literacy to children. A Nintendo representative responded to the criticism, stating that the localization was made with the regional market in mind, as the Quebec market made up 25% of sales for Nintendo of Canada at the time. Following the negative reception of Super Mario Galaxy's localization, later French-Canadian releases of Mario games mostly featured standard French. There are several regional differences in Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. In the Japanese game, the Chucky La Cola is actually vintage red wine. As well as Vivian, the genders of both Hooktail and Bonetail are inconsistent between different regions. In the English game, Hooktail is female, but they're referred to with male pronouns in the Spanish game. And despite being referred to as a male in the English version, Bonetail is said to be female in both the Japanese and German versions of the game. When Mario's Picross for the Game Boy was brought to the West, several of the game's puzzles were censored. Many puzzles which originally depicted alcoholic beverages such as beer and wine were replaced with various objects such as a boo, a silk hat, and a duck. A puzzle that originally showed a cigarette in an ashtray was also replaced with a rabbit. Another game that was altered for the West is Dr. Mario 64. When the game was brought to the West, the character Octo was recolored from black to orange. It's believed this was to avoid having the character compared to racial stereotypes of black people.
Did you know? Despite piracy largely being something that harms a game console sales, the lack of piracy on the GameCube actually hurt the system's performance in some regions. According to an article from IGN's Southeast Asian branch, the GameCube's inability to run pirated DVDs and game discs was a big reason many gamers in the area turned to the original Xbox and PlayStation 2. Piracy has been reported to run rampant in Southeast Asia, and although you might think this harms a console's sales, it's actually one of the reasons why Nintendo's handhelds like the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS sold so well in the region. It wasn't until Nintendo released the Wii that they once again saw home console success in Southeast Asia, with a big factor in its high sales being its ease of access for piracy. Despite the GameCube having far less piracy than Nintendo's other systems, the Big N still published an official anti-piracy training manual that showed consumers how to spot fake GameCube games. Some of Nintendo's tips included looking out for a colored tone to the bottom of discs instead of a silver one, poor quality printing on the top of discs, distorted-looking or low-quality game boxes, incorrect box sizes, missing components, and unrealistic price points. This guide would actually come in handy for some, like certain residents of the United Kingdom. In Staffordshire in the UK on April 5, 2005, an official anti-piracy operation confiscated around 20,000 DVDs and CDs, including games, films, and music at a car boot sale, which is sort of like a giant communal garage sale. The estimated value of the counterfeit merch was over 500 British pounds, which adjusted for inflation is over $1 million in today's money. While much of the stock was fake game discs for the then newly released Doom 3 on Xbox, there was also software previously unseen by the UK anti-piracy officials: fake GameCube mini DVDs. This was noteworthy, as the GameCube was much harder for pirates to crack than Microsoft's Xbox or PlayStation 2, and signified a breakthrough had happened with GameCube modding somewhere behind the scenes. One of the main hurdles for pirates was the system's use of mini DVDs, which were more difficult to replicate than standard-sized optical discs. That was until the UK-based company Daytel figured out what made the system's disc so hard to crack. The GameCube Mini's DVDs each have their own unique burst cutting area, or BCA, as do most regular CDs, DVDs, and Blu-rays. This BCA is read by the system's optical laser lens just like a barcode. But not only do the mini DVDs have unique BCAs, they also have 6 unique marks burned on the discs that are at a very specific and equal distance. These marks have to be burned onto the disc with a special laser and can't be replicated using a standard DVD writer. The GameCube checks not only the BCA, but that the 6 marks are in the right spot, and if everything checks out, the game starts up. If one of these marks is even slightly off, however, the GameCube won't boot the disc. This is of course only the case if the GameCube hasn't already been modded with special hardware to interfere with these checks. But Daytel figured out a simple way to get their software running on the GameCube by adding a custom BCA that tricked the console into thinking the disc had the 6 marks in the right place. After this was discovered, Daytel published their first Action Replay mini DVD for the GameCube in 2003. This Action Replay disc let players input cheat codes into save files on your memory card. For homebrew software, on the other hand, Daytel seemingly reversed this process. Rather than having a custom disc save custom data onto a memory card, Daytel released their own SD media launcher, which allowed you to load your own software from the system's memory card slot, including GameCube game ISO files. Outside of Daytel's SD Media Launcher, tons of other custom memory cards were made to load files from your own SD cards, USBs, or even devices that aren't intended for data, like the USB Gecko. The USB Gecko is a custom memory card that was designed for GameCube development and homebrew games and apps, but is more popularly used for loading game cheats and exploits. But these aren't the only ways to boot up GameCube ISO files. In 2003, Sega released a port of their Dreamcast original online RPG, Phantasy Star Online, on the GameCube. One of the game's key features on the GameCube was its compatibility with Nintendo's broadband adapter, which allowed the game to connect to the internet to keep itself updated and let gamers play with each other on the game's dedicated servers. Some hackers figured out that by changing DNS and IP address settings, they could trick the game to connect to custom programs running on their own PCs using an exploit dubbed PSO load. The program developed for the exploit disguised itself as an official Phantasy Star Online server that leaves the game always waiting for a connection. This would allow hackers to send custom GameCube executable files to their system and run them from Phantasy Star Online. This exploit could not only be used to run custom files from the GameCube, but allowed the GameCube to send data from itself back to your PC. This hack was an efficient way to send your currently loaded GameCube game to your PC as an official backup file. While it was a successful way to run homebrew, it was quite time-consuming, as anytime you wanted to run homebrew, you must first load into Phantasy Star Online. Like the Wii, the GameCube also has its own homebrew utility, similar to the popular homebrew channel, in the form of Swiss. Swiss is an all-in-one homebrew tool that allows you access to file browsing, custom DVD support, and offers support for previously mentioned custom memory cards like the USB Gecko. Swiss even lets you force 16:9 widescreen and progressive scan on real hardware. The GameCube not only had homebrew for the native console, but also homebrew for its add-ons, such as the Game Boy player. Game Boy Interface is homebrew software that allows anyone to play Game Boy games without the use of Nintendo's Game Boy Player Startup Disc, and also lets you play Game Boy to Game Boy Advance games in various different modes. The software's Standard Edition allows you to play Game Boy games more cleanly on modern displays, such as LCD and OLED TVs and monitors. With hardware like USB Gecko, the Standard Edition can also be used as a Game Boy Advance development kit. Other versions of the Game Boy interface are optimized for speedrunning Game Boy games, as well as a version that's more optimized for video capture devices. Other features outside of software variants include using the Game Boy Advance or Nintendo 64 controller as a controller for the GameCube, and even offered rumble support for the GBA using official Nintendo games and cartridges, such as Drill Dozer, WarioWare Twisted, and the Nintendo DS Rumble Pack. Outside of the Game Boy player, additional GameCube ports could also be used as an exploit for homebrew. The SD2SP2 chip is a custom PCB board that lets players use their own SD card as a form of memory for the GameCube. What makes this unique compared to custom memory cards is that SD2SP2 takes advantage of the GameCube's serial port 2. Interestingly enough, unlike the high-speed port and serial port 1, which are used for the Game Boy player and Nintendo's broadband adapter respectively, the GameCube's serial port 2 was never used officially by Nintendo, giving hackers access to both official Nintendo accessories as well as their own hardware like SD2SP2, as long as their GameCube has the right homebrew setup. The GameCube also has plenty of hardware modifications that aid in homebrew. One of the more popular hard mods for the GameCube is a mod chip named Xeno GC. This mod chip is applied to the system's optical drive logic board and injects its own custom patch onto the system. This patch would give a lot more freedom to your GameCube by adding features such as region-free game loading, making your GameCube act as both a PAL and NTSC console, made DVD-RW content readable, which allowed you to play custom GameCube discs, and much more. One important play in the mod chip's popularity is its easy accessibility to hard modding newcomers, and its cheap pricing. But like most mods that were designed for hobbyists to play around with, it was also abused by pirates. Despite Nintendo's efforts to make GameCube games difficult to reproduce, one feat hackers and programmers have found success with is emulating the system's hardware itself. The popular GameCube emulator Dolphin was officially released on September 22, 2003, almost exactly 2 years after the GameCube's official September 14, 2001 launch in Japan. Since its release, the Dolphin emulator has actually surpassed the original GameCube in features, many of which are used to modernize the GameCube playing experience, such as adding a 16:9 widescreen support, forced region change, GPU overclocking, seamless online play, and by far its most popular feature, Wii emulation. Since it's open source, the Dolphin emulator can even be modified to include even more features. Most recently, a group of programmers led by an engineer going by the alias Fizzy created a custom version of Dolphin named Slippy, which adds features like online matchmaking to Super Smash Bros. Melee. While the Dolphin emulator is still updated and worked on to this day, a specific version of the software was worked on very briefly. This emulator was titled the Dolphin Triforce, and the goal of the emulator was to run official Triforce games on your own hardware. The Triforce hardware was an official collaboration between Namco, Sega, and Nintendo, and was used by the trio of companies for their own arcade games, such as Donkey Kong Jungle Fever, F-Zero AX, and Mario Kart Arcade GP 1 and 2. The Triforce was made using official GameCube hardware, specifically the GameCube's custom graphics chip by ATI, nicknamed Flipper. The Triforce could be modified by Namco or Sega at their own will, with Sega even opting to use the same optical disc format as their Dreamcast console. Dolphin Triforce naturally let players emulate these arcade titles. And this isn't the only connection the GameCube has to emulation. In July 2018, security expert James Chambers figured out that you can load custom NES ROM images onto your GameCube using Nintendo's popular title, Animal Crossing. Within Animal Crossing, you can obtain a generic NES console item. Usually, NES console come bundled with one of 19 NES games in Animal Crossing, most of which are locked behind e-reader cards or official giveaways. When trying to interact with the generic NES console, however, the game will bring up the message, "I want to play my NES, but I don't have any software." Chambers found out what the game was actually trying to do is find NES ROM images in your loaded memory card. Chambers was able to not only load official NES ROMs, but was also able to get custom NES ROMs he made himself into the game. Many have theorized why Nintendo would include such a feature. Chambers himself believed Nintendo could have used the feature to sell promotional memory cards with the NES ROMs preloaded onto them. Animal Crossing could be used to load much more than just NES ROMs though. The same exploit used to load NES ROMs would soon be reverse engineered into loading custom GameCube files, known as .dol files.
Cheating is pretty great, really. We all have some fond memories of cheating in games, and some of us did it on the N64 too, with a little help from the Game Shark. And we're talking about real cheating, not just trying to use warps in the race with Koopa the Quick in Super Mario 64 and being told off, or trying to warp around Hyrule in Ocarina of Time to beat the Bigoron Sword quest and getting your time cut down to seconds. No, we're talking about the hard codes. Game Shark, built-in cheat codes, hacking, the real deal. The kind of cheats that make you feel like a genius, until ultimately you realize the only thing you were cheating was yourself. Or in the case of some of these N64 classics, the game will straight up tell you itself. Well, perhaps not quite so bluntly as that, but we will be looking at some fun trivia surrounding cheats on the N64, which either directly discourage the player from cheating, or restricts them for doing the dirty. The N64 was awesome, and its games were awesome too. Titles like, well, essentially the entire Rare catalog, let's be honest. But there were more games on the console than those, of course, like Star Wars Rogue Squadron, Battle Tanks, and the Turok franchise. But Rare really did blow everything out of the water with their slick sense of humor and hardcore game development chops. We'll start off with one punishment for cheating that was particularly harsh, with some consequences being quite permanent. Donkey Kong 64 was an incredible game when it was released, bringing the collectathon subgenre to its logical conclusion. But just because a game is good doesn't mean people won't want to cheat in it. This seems particularly true with platformer games, where young hands may not be able to dexterously perform acrobatics like an ape in the trees. One way you might make progress in such a situation is to remove one of the challenges that prevents progress, like the entire health system. By giving yourself infinite health, you'd think that it'd be smooth sailing to get to the end of DK's adventure, but let us assure you, this is not the case. If playing the game with the assistance of a GameShark device to enable infinite health, everything will be fine until the player attempts to reload the game without the cheat enabled. If this is done, then the player will find themselves in for a world of chaos. The entire game may become corrupted, so while it might continue to boot and play, it will not be a fun experience. Characters may fly around the screen, vigorously vibrating on the spot, arms gesticulating in all manner of disturbing ways. This is the lightest of the problems, however, as the game autosaves regularly, which is a bigger problem than it may initially seem. Many players have reported that these glitchy effects only exist in the save file currently being used, but become permanent as soon as the game is saved. And with the game autosaving practically every minute, this is a surefire way to ruin a save file. That said, some players have reported that these issues corrupted their entire cartridge and persist even after deleting the save. If this is true, it means that the entire cartridge is practically unsalvageable, especially when other glitches that result from using the cheat are dying in a single hit or being completely unable to pick up items, rendering the game an unplayable mess. We actually think that this was not an intended result of punishing cheaters from Rare, but rather a result of the cheat device screwing with the game's code just a bit too much, and then the autosave feature making the results permanent. But we suppose only the game's programmers will know for certain. Something that Rare very much did intend for, however, was the mature nature of one of their other titles, Conker's Bad Fur Day. If a developer wants you to know that they don't approve of your cheating habits, they don't need to brick your game to do so. They can just tell you directly. For example, there is a full cheat code entry screen within Conker's Bad Fur Day, but that isn't to say the team wants you to use it to its fullest. They will in fact tell you they don't want you to. Sometimes when the player enters this menu, the imp that makes quips as you type will make fun of you, saying, "You cheated back!" Using cheats is one thing, but making a mistake is another. If an incorrect code is entered, the player will be told that somebody must have given them the wrong cheat code. Somebody told you the wrong cheat! But if the wrong code is entered for a second time, then the demon will take a more aggressive approach and say, "Didn't work first time, ain't gonna work second time, dipshit!" We're pretty sure calling players a dipshit qualifies as a punishment, so there it is. Rare would often acknowledge their players' choice to cheat, and with that, would try to discourage the behavior so their games could be enjoyed as intended. Though obviously, with Rare having implemented the cheats in the first place, GameShark notwithstanding, it wasn't as though the team never wanted anybody using cheats. It's just they don't want people fronting for doing so. In games like GoldenEye 007, cheats had to be unlocked by performing well in a level, but the game would also restrict progress if the player made use of cheats in the campaign, as if the player completes a level while a cheat is active, neither additional cheats nor the next level will unlock. However, as an odd side effect of this broadly implemented restriction, this included cheats which would actually make the game harder. Despite giving themselves a handicap, using any cheat that made a level harder would still result in no reward. Perfect Dark, on the other hand, while having the same requirements to unlock cheats, was a bit more direct in telling the player they aren't all that. When completing a mission with cheats enabled, the player's mission status and agent status will display cheated and dishonored, respectively, as opposed to complete and active if the player finished a level legitimately. Speaking of first-person shooters, though, we're going to move away from Rare. Another game which also withheld rewards from players who used cheats was the second Turok entry. One of the most simple cheats a player can use in a chapter or stage-based game is the good old classic level skip cheat. This was a blessing in the age of impossibly difficult titles which had no means of retaining progress, but in Turok 2, using it would mean you weren't going to get to see the true reward. The game's best ending. Turok 2 had two different endings depending on the player's performance towards the end of the game, but if they had used cheats at any stage to get here, they won't be able to see the best ending of the game, only the bad ending. Turok 3 also had an anti-cheat measure, but took a bit of a different approach. If players used cheats, they would actually have an additional message at the end of its credits sequence. After the final cutscene of the game that is revealed post-credits, text will appear which reads, "You finished, but you cheated." Activating cheats can sometimes have consequences as a result of exactly what you ask for. Battle Tanks is a game which entails exactly what you might expect. You are battling, and you are a tanks. The title has a number of cheats for the player to take advantage of, such as the most universal cheat of all time, infinite health. However, if the player makes use of this cheat, they may find themselves in a situation that the developers might have just never considered, or if they did, it's a pretty devilish way of punishing the player. The campaign mode of the game cannot be completed if the player has infinite health, as they will find themselves enjoying the pleasures of a bonus stage at some point, which involves surviving for as long as possible while destroying as many enemy tanks as you can before you yourself are destroyed. So as you might have guessed, because the player has infinite health, they will of course never be destroyed. As the player is unable to turn cheats off mid-game, there is no way of getting past any bonus stages while the cheat is active, meaning that in this case, a simple cheat will softlock the whole game. Do you remember the beginning of the video where we said we wouldn't be talking about simple shortcut style cheats? Well,
I lied.
Rogue Squadron doesn't punish the player for using cheat codes, but if you take a shortcut which is clearly visible on a map, that is unacceptable behavior. It deserves criticism, in fact, which is exactly what the game does. During the Beggar's Canyon race, the announcer will notice if the player takes a sneaky shortcut across the course, and will state that, "Someone's cheating out there, we're gonna have to start this race over." The number one rule of cheating in a game, of course, is that if nobody sees you do it, nobody has to know. If the player attempts to make this quick skip in a more stealthy fashion, sticking low to the third dune as you pass over and being as quick as you can be, the game will not restart the race. Perhaps the announcer just didn't spot the faux pas. So this is one case where cheating well actually makes a difference. Going back to Rare, because Rare apparently made 80% of all noteworthy N64 games it seems, and one of their most popular franchises of all time, Banjo-Kazooie has perhaps the most definitely intended, fully divulged, and harshest anti-cheat punishments in this video. In the game's original release on the N64, if 3 or more secret codes are used to unlock levels at Treasure Trove Cove, Grunty will be most perturbed and will erase the player's entire save file. Bottles does warn the player ahead of time that this would happen, however, but even then, it seems a bit much. This mechanic in the game is known as Grunty's Code Vengeance, and will only work with codes not given to the player in-game, like the ones to provide infinite power-ups, remove objects, transform the player, etc, etc. In the Xbox Live Arcade release of the game, this mechanic wound up being disabled, but that doesn't mean that there is no punishment for the crime at all. Instead of deleting the player's save after 3 codes are entered, the game will just disable the player from saving the game after even just 1 code has been entered, as well as disabling achievements and leaderboards. There's a similar reaction to entering codes in the Xbox version of Banjo-Tooie as well, which had no punishment in the original Nintendo 64 release, though this makes sense as most modern titles will disable features like achievements if the player uses cheats. Hello, and welcome to Did You Know Gaming Extra. Today, we're looking at quite a wide range of Nintendo DS games that were censored. Due to the system being largely aimed at a younger audience in the West, many DS games were altered when brought to the region. In Harvest Moon DS, there are several minigames within a casino, including blackjack, poker, and a memory game. In Western releases, the word casino was removed from the game's images. This censorship went even further in the European release, with the blackjack and poker minigames being replaced with the same memory-matching game. This was likely done to keep the game's age rating low in Europe, as the PEGI ratings board is more strict about references to gambling when rating a game. Another small change can be seen in the game's introduction, where the mayor is attacked by the player's dog. Outside of Japan, the screen fades to white as the mayor is attacked. However, the Japanese game has a more gruesome implication, with the screen fading to red. South Korea has a law where the country's citizens aren't allowed to gamble, with a few exceptions, even outside of the country. This law also impacts how video games are localized in the region, with gambling being removed to avoid an adult rating. One such censored game was Mario Party DS. The Korean version of the title was altered in multiple ways. The minigames Chips and Dips, as well as Shuffleboard Showdown, were outright cut due to their strong casino theme. The board Bowser's Pinball Machine was also altered, with the slot machine area being changed to a game where players time button presses to hit an alien ship. A whack-a-mole game was also added in place of the roulette area. Likely because of these laws, Super Mario 64 DS was also censored. The Rec Room area gave access to a whole range of casino and gambling-based games, but was removed from the Korean version. As a result of this, the MIPS rabbits that unlocked the minigames when caught were also cut from the game. When Pokemon Diamond and Pearl released in South Korea, they were subject to the same kind of censorship. The slot machines in Veilstone's Game Corner were made non-playable. When Pokemon Platinum was released, the slot machines were still non-playable in Korea, but also became non-playable in the Europe versions too. This censorship carried over to Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, where every region besides Japan had its slot machines replaced with a new skill-based minigame called Voltorb Flip. Further Pokemon games would remove the Game Corner altogether. Professor Layton and the Curious Village also had an unusual instance of censorship. The character Jarvis was originally called Guinness in the Japanese game. This was changed in the English version, as the name wasn't simply a reference to an alcoholic drink, but also a multi-billion-dollar corporation that could have easily taken the game's developers to court. Another small piece of naming censorship can be found in the DS spiritual successor to Okami, Okami Den. The game's Death Beast enemies were actually named God Beast or Godly Beast enemies in the Japanese version of the game. This was likely changed to remove any inclusion of the word God, particularly in the United States. The WarioWare series has had many regional changes over the course of its history. The franchise's titles are often based in Japanese culture, and needed to be altered to make sense to Westerners when the games were brought to North America and Europe. However, not all changes were made just so ideas weren't lost in translation. One example can be seen in WarioWare DIY, where the letters in Mona's Breakdown microgame were altered. A diving swimmer was swapped out for a more covered-up gymnast, and what appears to be a cross-dressing man was also removed from the microgame. WarioWare Touched had some regional censorship as well. In the game's South Korean version, the microgame Sweet Nothings replaced the blushing person being blown in their ear with a cat. This could be due to the character's reaction, who seems vaguely aroused. In the international versions of the Gunslinger microgame, the gun on the top screen was removed. The gun shown in the Japanese game is the Famicom equivalent of the NES Zapper. It's not known why the gun wasn't simply changed to an NES Zapper in the West, but it's likely Nintendo wanted to avoid any illustrations of guns altogether and left the gun out. Interestingly, the gun was added back into the game's Chinese localization. The bizarre dating sim minigame compilation title, Feel the Magic XYXX, was also censored between regions. The changes can be immediately seen on the title screen of the Western releases. While these versions show a silhouetted woman in a bikini, the Japanese game's title screen showed her topless. Although this censorship wasn't applied to Europe, the region decided to give the title a more suggestive name, Project Rub. The dungeon-crawling RPG From the Abyss was also censored in the West. The character Helen had her design altered, which can even be seen on the game's box arts. Helen could be seen on the back of the Japanese box art, but was put front and center for the North American cover. Some fans noticed that Helen's clothes were altered on the American box art to cover up more of her chest. The game's logo also seems to have been strategically placed to hide as much skin as possible. 3 more DS games, Luminous Arc 2, Steel Princess, and Super Robot Tyson OG Saga Endless Frontier all had their box arts altered. Luminous Arc 2 and Endless Frontier's box arts were altered to cover up and obscure women's chests, while Steel Princess extended Kukri's dress to cover the top of her legs. Your Brain Coach was actually pulled from store shelves in the United Kingdom after its release. This was due to complaints of the word spastic appearing on screen when players didn't perform well. Interestingly, this same English language version was sold unaltered in Australia, as the word is not considered particularly offensive in the region. Brain Coach was recalled, but another DS game narrowly avoided the same fate. In 2007, one man from Northern Ireland suggested certain words should be removed from Scrabble for the Nintendo DS. Mr. McAdam was playing Scrabble on the DS with his daughter, and they were stuck trying to find the last 5-letter anagram in their session. McAdam told Belfast Telegraph, "I hit the give up option and the term lesbo appeared on the screen. I nearly fell out of my chair." According to the Chamber's official Scrabble dictionary, lesbo is defined as a derogatory slang short form of lesbian. The rules of Scrabble dictate that if a word is present in the dictionary, it can be used in the game, no matter the meaning. Although Ubisoft didn't recall or censor the game, they did apologize and explained the word's inclusion, saying, "In the case of Scrabble 2007, the game uses a word list based on the Chamber's official Scrabble dictionary, and all approved words contained in this dictionary are playable in the game. The dictionary includes words used in the English language that may be considered unusual or offensive. It is for this reason that the game includes a junior option, which will prevent the player and computer using these unusual or offensive words in play. However, lesbo is not considered offensive by the official dictionary, and therefore is playable in both options. This wasn't the only instance where a company was pressured to recall or change their product. In 2009, a news report was published by WPRI's News 10, highlighting a mother's claims that the DS was indoctrinating her children into Islam. The mother purchased baby pals on the DS for her child, and reportedly heard the babies in the game saying, "Islam is the light." However, according to a representative from publisher Crave Entertainment, this wasn't the case. The sound bit wasn't recorded by Crave, and actually came from a licensed recording of a baby babbling. This same licensed sample was also used in Fisher-Price's Little Mummy Cuddle and Coo line of dolls, which was also accused of uttering the religious phrase. The Crave representative pointed out that the 5-month-old baby being recorded was too young to pronounce the alleged phrase or speak in grammatically correct sentences. And now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today, we're talking about Super Monkey Ball Banana Splits for the PlayStation Vita. The Japanese version of the game has downloadable maps featuring swimsuit model Yuki Kawamura. These levels were only accessible via codes that were in specially marked boxes. Kawamura appears many times pasted over and over in the maps, with her breasts being bumps in the platforms that the player can roll over. This may have been deemed inappropriate for a kid-friendly game, which is why it hasn't been available in other countries for download since its release. Hello and welcome to Did You Know Gaming Extra. In today's episode, we'll be looking at a number of gaming-related lawsuits. Nintendo is a force to be reckoned with in the gaming industry. That doesn't make them untouchable or above the law. While a lawsuit against a company doesn't necessarily expose them for malicious intent, the reasons behind some charges can demonstrate a small lack of thought or care. When promoting their re-release of Donkey Kong Country Returns for 3DS, the company promoted the title at the Los Angeles Zoo. Their press release claimed that fans will get a chance to spend time with Donkey Kong and some of his friends from the Animal Kingdom. Throughout the day of the game's launch, May 24, 2013, actor Parker Mills was hired to wear a Donkey Kong outfit in the park. While this should have been a simple acting gig, Mills was denied the chance to take any breaks throughout the day, and wasn't given any of the required ice packs or even cold drinks to cool him down in the suit. This was particularly harsh, as he would be entertaining guests under the sweltering Southern Californian sun. Unsurprisingly, legal action was taken against Nintendo. The lawsuit alleged that the company's ambassador at the event, who escorted, oversaw, and instructed Mills for the day, failed to provide the proper care for their client. Mills's legal representatives say that as a result, their client suffered from an aortic dissection, the tearing of aortic walls. This meant that the actor had to go through a surgery which implanted a permanent heart defibrillator. Strangely, this wouldn't be the last time Nintendo had a case against them relating to the negligent handling of an actor. In fact, it's not the last time that it would involve a Donkey Kong costume. In 2016, Nintendo hired Michael O'Conatrillo to suit up at a mall in Culver City, California. O'Conatrillo claims that, while the suit was poorly ventilated and unreasonably and dangerously hot, he was under strict orders not to remove the costume. Michael claims that by doing so he has suffered mental and emotional distress, as well as permanent damage, though the lawsuit he filed doesn't mention any specific injuries. Nintendo has even had legal issues with Donkey Kong in his digital form in the past. Ikegami Shunshinki, a Japanese manufacturing company who operated a video game division in the mid-80s, helped Nintendo create their arcade release of the original Donkey Kong. Ikegami Shunshinki held a contract with Nintendo for the programming and manufacture of numerous arcade titles, including Donkey Kong, with Shigeru Miyamoto giving the company ideas and character designs to be put into the game. This contract meant that Ikegami Shunshinki would have the exclusive rights for producing the Donkey Kong arcade boards, a clause which Nintendo ignored, producing their own boards to keep up with the unexpected high demand for the game. Nintendo hired another company, Iwasaki Engineering, to reverse engineer the game to produce a sequel. This was because, as the game was originally produced by Ikegami, Nintendo didn't have a copy of the original source code for Donkey Kong in their possession. Ikegami Shunshinki believed that Nintendo violated their contractual agreement over the game's ownership, claiming that Ikegami held ownership over the Donkey Kong code. In response, Nintendo filed an injunction against the company in 1983. In retaliation, Ikegami filed a lawsuit against Nintendo regarding both Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., a case which would go on until 1990, when a court decided that Nintendo did not own the original Donkey Kong arcade code. The two companies would go on to settle out of court, and despite the ruling, the arcade release of Donkey Kong would see two ports, one in Donkey Kong 64's Frantic Factory, and again as its own release on the Nintendo Switch under the Arcade Archives banner. Speaking of the Switch, the device itself is at the heart of its own lawsuit. In August 2017, GameVice, previously known as WikiPad Inc., claimed that Nintendo has infringed on their patent for their Joy-Con controllers. The patent, which was filed in 2012, relates to a pair of control modules which connect with a separate and distinct digital device. This patent was granted and served as the basis for their WikiPad, an Android tablet with its own detachable controllers which released in 2013 to mixed reviews. While looking to recoup damages from Nintendo, GameVice is also seeking out an injunction against the game's publisher, which will prevent Nintendo from continuing to sell the Switch itself. Their reasoning is that the sale of the Switch has caused and is continuing to cause damage and irreparable injury to GameVice. Most courts demonstrate a reluctance for injunctions against patent-related sales, meaning that such a move would be unlikely to play out, even if to prevent the sale of a product that directly competes with their own. While GameVice's WikiPad product is no longer manufactured and sold in stores, the company itself has since moved on to creating game controller peripherals for other mobile devices, such as phones and tablets, granting some gravity to their claims of damages from a competitor making use of their patent. Nintendo encountering legal battles with their peripherals is also nothing new. In 1991, Nintendo and Toys R Us faced a lawsuit looking for $10,000 in damages when Nicole Abruzzi received medical attention for carpal tunnel syndrome, a form of repetitive strain injury. Labruzzi would spend several hours a day for several weeks playing video games, in particular using the NES light gun controller to play Duck Hunt. While her issues lessened after she stopped playing the game, she would still feel numbness when trying to perform basic actions such as typing or carrying bags of shopping. Her legal team argued that the game should have been designed differently, or at least had a warning attached to the product which informed the customer of the potential for injury. This was one of the earliest cases of a claim against a company for strains relating to video games, coining the name Nintenditis. And as always, now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we'll be looking at an entry from the Spyro series. An unused area can be found inside the game data for Spyro: A Hero's Tale. The area is actually Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Eurocom, the developers of A Hero's Tale, had previously worked on Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets for the Game Boy Advance, GameCube, PlayStation 2, and Xbox. It's speculated that this area was imported into the game to test the flying mechanics of Sergeant Bird.